At the very moment when our main character Mike was already on the verge of ascension, he suddenly decided to return to the past. To do this, he used a skill that changes fate. At that moment, a ray of light illuminated the altar. Time and space are distorted, sending our protagonist into the distant past 5,000 years ago. Then lightning struck from the sky and hit the roof of the school building. So the main character returned to May 2017, to a time when he was still an ordinary university student. Finally coming to his senses, Mike realized that he had managed to travel back in time. He found himself right on the doorstep of Longshan Technical University. Life was in full swing all around. Students were going about their business and simply enjoying a carefree life. And at that moment, Mike suddenly burst into tears, remembering what happened to his mother and sister in his past life. However, now he has finally returned to atone for his sin. Then the young man thought that in this life he would never again allow that man, Josh, to harm his family. Mike immediately pulled himself together and hurried back to the dorm, to room 1103. There he found himself completely alone. Mike already had a clear goal, to make money as quickly as possible. In this case, he will be able to change the difficult situation of his family, but to do this he will need to earn every possible yuan. So the young man opened his laptop and started typing something quickly. After a while, there was a noise outside the door. His roommates returned. They were getting ready to go try the new restaurant. However, when they opened the door and saw Mike sitting at the table, their attitude immediately changed and the guys started making fun of him. One of the students mockingly stated that young Mr. Mike was skipping classes again. He added that his friends were hungry and it would be nice if he treated them to dinner again. The hero heard everything, but pretended not to pay attention, continuing to concentrate on typing on the keyboard. Seeing that he was not reacting in any way, one of the neighbors spoke again, this time much louder and more angrily. The guy asked Mike if he was afraid that they would tell the whole group his secret, but the hero still did not answer. Seeing that the guy was stubbornly pretending to be deaf, the same neighbor began to get even angrier, and his friends tried to calm him down. One of them remarked that they had kept his secret all this time, but had never received any gratitude from him. Still, Mike didn't pay any attention to them. He calmly put the laptop in his backpack and slung it over his shoulder. The hero then coldly stated that if someone liked to talk so much, then he could go outside and talk as much as he wanted. Although he was indeed reborn thanks to the blessing of the heavens, his magical power was almost completely depleted. So, in addition to making money, Mike needed to find a way to restore his abilities. The protagonist then went to a computer repair shop, but they only got 800 yuan for his laptop. The hero thought that his mother had once saved for months on literally everything, just to buy this computer for his studies at university. Moreover, in his past life, during his studies, it was vanity that pushed Mike to pretend to be rich. Back then, he spent his days in bars, generously treating his classmates and living ostentatiously. When the money ran out, the young man shamelessly wrote messages to his mother, demanding that she send more. It was because of this that his mother's health gradually deteriorated, which ultimately led to a tragic ending that no one wanted to see. At that moment, the young man suddenly heard someone loudly call his name. He turned around and saw that it was his little sister, Molly. Seeing his sister alive and unharmed in front of him, the hero once again felt his heart fill with emotion. In his past life, it was he who got his sister into trouble. This ultimately led to the girl committing suicide by jumping from a tall building. It was all because of the pressure from that man, Josh, which Molly couldn't withstand. Noticing her brother's confused expression, the girl asked what had happened to him. Then Mike hastened to assure her that everything was fine, and he himself thought about the fact that in this life he would definitely protect his mother and sister. After this, the hero watched as the girl rummaged through her bag for a while, then took out a paper bag and handed it to her brother. She explained that inside was 5,000 yuan that she had earned, and he should take the money and stop asking his mother for it. Mike was a little surprised. He didn't understand how his sister had so much money. However, Molly quickly thrust the package into his hands and began to angrily scold her brother because she knew perfectly well that he was pretending. She had already heard that he had threatened to quit his mother's studies if she did not give him money, and that he had also spent his days drinking with questionable friends. So the girl said that he should take the money and become a better person. However, the hero told his sister to keep the money for her studies. But as soon as the conversation turned to school, the girl's face became even gloomier. After much hesitation, she finally dared to tell the truth. It turned out that she had already dropped out of school. The family found themselves deeply in debt, and creditors began coming to their home demanding repayment. Her mother couldn't earn enough on her own, so Molly decided to leave school to work and help her. Hearing this, the young man felt as if a knife had been pierced into his heart. Then the hero quickly approached and hugged his sister tightly from behind. His sudden action greatly surprised the girl, and she asked in confusion what he was doing. Then Mike admitted that he was sorry and asked only for a little time. He added that she should trust him because he would definitely make their family's life better. Molly had become accustomed to his empty promises, but for some reason this time she felt something had changed. After breaking up with his sister, Mike went to a traditional Chinese medicine shop. There, using the money he had recently received from selling his computer, he purchased several medicinal herbs. The hero then headed to the forest located on the outskirts of the city. These herbs, as it turned out, were necessary for him to prepare a special elixir. Since spiritual energy on Earth was scarce, such elixirs became a necessary means for rapid development and cultivation. After some time, the herbs in the cauldron began to gradually merge with each other and then turned into a transparent liquid. Thus, the protagonist was convinced that the process was successful. After this, the young man drank the resulting medicine. Then Mike sat down to meditate and began to regulate his breathing. The path of immortal cultivation was divided into 5 levels. Even reaching just the first level of the chi refining realm would already allow Mike to possess strength that far exceeds that of a human. After about an hour of intense practice, the protagonist successfully broke through to the first level of the chi refining realm. Then he decided to test his new strength. He struck a tree with his fist, and then the powerful blow passed through the thick trunk without difficulty. Having seen the result, the hero was very pleased. Such strength was enough to deal with the masters of Chinese martial arts. But now the hero was faced with another, no less important question: how to make money as quickly as possible. And then an idea immediately popped into Mike's head. The place where the hero went turned out to be an internet cafe, but he came there to take advantage of the legendary retail chain. The site was known as a black market, where people could trade anything from information to posting all sorts of tasks. As soon as Mike opened the site, he immediately noticed a task posted on the main page by an anonymous user. Its contents stated that it was necessary to kill the daughter of Axel, a rich man from Longshan, for a reward of 10 million. Below was a notice that an assassin named Johnny had already accepted the job. However, Mike did not believe that someone would spend 10 million just to take a girl's life. And then the hero saw a message from Axel that he was looking for a master who would agree to protect his daughter for a month for 20 million. No one had accepted this task yet, and without a second's hesitation, the protagonist immediately pressed the button to accept the task. On this site, his identifier was the name Wu Ji, a nickname that hadn't meant anything to anyone yet. As soon as the hero took off his headphones, he received a phone call. After giving his location, Mike sat back in his chair and slowly waited for the Su family's people to come pick him up. However, on the other end of the line, Axel's secretary, upon learning that the man was in an internet cafe, was rather skeptical. She decided to check with her master whether this man was reliable. Axel said they should be grateful that anyone had agreed to take the task at all and offered to bring him first. About half an hour later, the young man stood in front of the Su family's villa. The moment Mike got out of the car, Axel was stunned. He never expected that the person who accepted the task of confronting Johnny would be so young. The owner of the house personally came out to greet the guest and asked if he was Mr. Wuji. He offered to go inside, but Mike asked Axel to show him around the villa so he could get acquainted with the area. The owner immediately agreed and told him that he had a sworn enemy in the business world and that they had been fighting for many years. Not long ago, Axel obtained evidence of his rival's illegal activities and handed it over to the police. On the way, Mike also took a close look at the Su family's villa and then noticed that the villa might seem quiet. However, in his opinion, there are probably quite a lot of people hiding here. Axel was amazed because at that moment there were indeed many bodyguards in the villa, hidden in different places. However, Mike still seriously warned him that against a killer of Johnny's caliber, these people were completely useless. At that moment, Axel's secretary ran up to them again and announced that Master Theodore had arrived. It turned out that Axel had also invited Theodore, a mid-level martial artist, and his student Jack had come with him. Theodore complained that he wanted to find another assistant, but everyone refused as soon as they heard that the opponent would be Johnny. Hearing this, Axel immediately became gloomy. Then Theodore hastened to assure him that there was no need to lose hope, since Axel's father had been his old friend for many years. Only then did Theodore notice that there was another person standing nearby. Then Axel quickly introduced him. He explained that this young man was the one who accepted the black market mission under the alias Wuji. Hearing this, Theodore and Jack literally opened their mouths in surprise, because in front of them stood a very young guy. Then Jack approached the young man with a question, saying that the reward of 20 million yuan was very great for him. Theodore sharply pulled Jack up short, demanding respect. But despite what he said, both Theodore and Axel had doubts deep down. The main character looked too young, and it was hard to imagine how strong he really was. Then Axel cautiously asked if the young man had a plan to protect his daughter. Mike nodded calmly, and first asked that all the surveillance cameras in the villa be dismantled and that the hidden bodyguards be removed. Hearing this, Theodore assumed that Mike was trying to lure Johnny out, but he didn't think such a ploy would work. The hero, however, explained that his decision was dictated by the fact that all these people were too weak and would only get in the way in the event of a collision. These words stunned Axel, Theodore, and Jack, because they had no idea about Mike's true strength. However, his confidence and even some audacity made a strong impression. The hero then looked at Theodore and Jack and noted that even the two of them were hardly worth staying here. Hearing this, Jack flared up with anger, indignant that he imagined himself to be the great Gerard and demanded to fight him. Mike just chuckled and noted that if someone wanted to test his capabilities, then Jack alone was clearly not enough for this. Such words only angered the enemy even more. And then the hero suggested that Axel call all the villa's fighters and attack simultaneously, assuring him that he could handle even 100 people. Axel, however, did not expect such self-confidence from Mike and suggested first testing the young man's strength in a duel with Jack. But the protagonist was clearly not interested in such low-level tests. Seeing the guards, Jack mockingly suggested they see how many seconds Mike could last. At the same moment, the bodyguards surrounding the hero simultaneously rushed forward. Mike, however, remained standing, showing no intention of either attacking or retreating. Axel and Theodore began to doubt his calmness, and even suggested that the young man was simply paralyzed with fear. As the first of the bodyguards approached and struck, something incredible happened. His fist seemed to collide with an invisible wall. At that very moment, a powerful blast wave arose around Mike, the center of which turned out to be the hero himself. The bodyguards were instantly thrown in different directions, and not one of them was able to stay on their feet. While the main character continued to stand calmly in place, he did not receive the slightest damage. Axel, Theodore, and Jack were shocked by what they saw. They couldn't understand what had just happened, because the hero hadn't even made a single move. At this moment, Theodore began to suspect something. After this, Mike turned his head towards Jack again and gestured for him to come over too. Even though he had just witnessed the hero's incredible strength, his arrogant behavior still irritated him. So Jack rushed forward with all his might. He jumped high and performed a spinning kick. However, he didn't even have time to touch the hero's body, as the next moment he was thrown back by a powerful counterattack. Judging by how far he was thrown, one could understand how destructive this force was. Jack flew far to the side and crashed hard into a tree, breaking it with the force of the flight. Everyone present was shocked by how great the hero's strength was. Having dealt with Jack, Mike calmly turned to Theodore. He quickly folded his hands in a respectful bow and admitted that he had been foolish for not having recognized his true strength immediately. At this time, Jack struggled to his feet, not understanding whether even the master was incapable of resisting Mike. Theodore explained that even Mr. Liu, who had recently reached the martial sovereign level, would not be able to compete with this Mike. After these words, Axel's jaw dropped, as he could not believe that he had accidentally met such a powerful person. Theodore confidently confirmed that the hero is indeed a martial lord-level master. Theodore's words always inspired confidence, but this time Axel found it difficult to accept what he heard. And it was at that moment that Axel's daughter, Abby, finally woke up. She heard loud sounds outside, which caused her to wake up. Convinced of Mike's strength, the man invited him into the house to discuss in detail the plan to protect his precious daughter. Before starting the conversation, the hero put forward two conditions. First, he asked for an advance, specifically 2 million. Secondly, during the entire operation, his instructions must be followed without question. Axel saw no reason to refuse and immediately ordered the money to be prepared. After this, Mike added that having received the advance, the next day he would need to leave for 24 hours to take care of a personal matter. This news visibly alarmed Axel because Johnny was famous for his speed and, most likely, could attack his daughter today or tomorrow. Then the main character offered to take the girl out of the house with him. Axel found himself in a difficult situation because he was sure that there was no place safer than the Sue family villa. While the man was thinking, he suddenly heard his name being called, and looking up, he saw Abby on the stairs, dressed in a nightgown. Seeing his daughter in this state, Axel immediately demanded that she come back and change. However, the girl objected that she had been living like in prison for several days, and therefore did not see anything strange in the fact that she went out in her pajamas. Theodore hastened to intervene and tried to smooth things over, noticing that the girl had been locked up for too long and was therefore irritated. Abby looked around at the people present and quickly noticed that Mike's face was the only one she didn't recognize. Axel immediately warned his daughter that in front of her was Mr. Wuji, their honored guest, invited especially for her protection. Hearing that Mike had been invited to defend her, Abby merely looked at the young man with disdain. At this point, the hero introduced himself to the girl, after which he explained that he did not intend to restrict her freedom or keep her locked up at home. Upon hearing these words, the girl immediately asked whether this meant that she would actually be allowed to leave the house. Then the hero glanced briefly at Axel. The man, although filled with anxiety, still understood that he had no other choice, so he sighed heavily and reluctantly nodded. Having received what she wanted, Abby noticeably perked up because she had been terribly tired of sitting locked up for the last few days. However, the man then strictly added a condition. If she went somewhere with Mike tomorrow, she had to be with him at all times. The girl agreed, but deep down she decided that she would not obey just any bodyguard. The next day, Abby dressed up carefully and got into a luxury car with Mike. At the same time, 20 million yuan were credited to the protagonist's bank account. Abby immediately ordered the driver, Uncle Juan, to go straight to the mall since she hadn't been shopping for a long time. However, the hero sitting next to him instead told the driver to head to Longshan University. Hearing this, the girl instantly flared up with anger and sharply demanded that the driver explain whose orders he was going to carry out. The day before, Axel had specifically warned all the staff at the house that for a month everyone was required to obey Mike's orders. Realizing that the driver was ignoring her, Abby became completely angry, demanding that the car be stopped immediately and that she be let out. Uncle Juan looked helplessly at Mike through the rearview mirror. To his surprise, the hero allowed him to stop. The car immediately stopped. The girl triumphantly opened the door and got out, demonstratively declaring that she was leaving. However, the place where the car stopped turned out to be deserted, and seeing this, Abby was momentarily confused. It took her only a few seconds to assess the situation, after which she hurried back into the car. Mike offered a compromise. First, let her go with him quietly on his business, and after that, he promised to take her wherever she wanted. Abby snorted in displeasure, but didn't argue further. Soon, the car pulled up to the dormitory of Longshan University. Abby looked at the old building in front of her with disbelief, surprised to see that this was apparently where Mike lived. The main character did not answer anything and simply silently got out of the car. However, the appearance of an expensive car near the dormitory, and especially the appearance of a beautiful girl from it, immediately attracted the attention of the students. Mike asked her to follow him, but the girl categorically refused. Abby didn't understand how she could even enter such a place. Uncle Huang tried to gently remind her that her father had told her to stay within Mr. Wuji's sight, but his words had no effect. Then Mike said that if she wanted to go shopping later, she better hurry up and follow him. The urge to go shopping was stronger, so Abby, pouting with displeasure, nevertheless followed the hero to his room. At that moment, she suddenly stopped, seeing something disgusting. She saw the hero's 3 roommates sitting shirtless and playing a game. Seeing that Mike had returned and brought a beautiful girl with him, they immediately began to make crude jokes. After his rebirth, Mike had long felt disgust for these former acquaintances. Now, seeing them openly harassing Abby right in front of him, the hero instantly became angry. He stepped forward, shielding the girl with his body, and sharply demanded that she stay away from her. However, the 3 guys just grinned mockingly, deciding that this was just a harmless joke between friends. Then Mike remarked that if they enjoyed picking on girls so much, he would show them some real fun. After these words, the hero quietly used a small part of his magic to scare them. Under the spell's influence, the 3 students suddenly saw countless skeletons around them. They surrounded the villains on all sides and emitted terrible screams. The scene was so horrifying that all 3 instantly fell to their knees. The boys trembled and begged for mercy. Abby watched in amazement and wondered what had happened to them. Then Mike explained that it was just an illusion. Then the hero asked the girl to wait a little while he collected a few things. After some time, they were sitting in the car again. Abby still couldn't forget the strange reaction of his neighbors and wondered what kind of magic he used. Mike jokingly said that she had already seen his strength and therefore she should not continue to contradict him. The girl instinctively cowered, covering her face with her hands. However, the next moment the hero calmly sat down and indifferently noted that it was just a joke. Realizing she had been played again, Abby became furious and was ready to attack him right there in the car. At that moment, Uncle Juan, who was driving, turned around and asked where they should go next. Then Mike called his sister to find out where she was. The girl replied that she was currently at work and gave her address. After this, the car headed to Lunta Street, building 107. Only when he arrived there did Mike realize it was a restaurant, but all the waitresses were young girls dressed as maids. Abby, not knowing that Mike's sister worked there, decided that the young man simply had rather strange tastes. Meanwhile, they went inside the restaurant, chose a free table, and ordered several dishes. Mike then asked the waitress if there was a girl named Molly working there. She immediately nodded and explained that the girl was currently in the kitchen and would soon come out with the order. After some time, the hero actually saw his sister, who came out of the kitchen with a plate in her hands. However, the heavy makeup and the maid's uniform she wore looked extremely unpleasant to him, and Mike immediately rose from his seat. However, at that very moment, he noticed how some man brazenly slapped the girl on the buttocks and loudly called her. He stated that Molly had already made him wait too long. Seeing this, the hero immediately frowned. That man turned out to be Sam, the 23-year-old sole heir of Sun Properties Group. Molly tried to politely decline to serve him, citing her busy schedule. However, the young master was not going to let her go so easily. Then Sam suddenly pulled out a ring box from his pocket and publicly asked Molly to be his girlfriend. This gesture immediately attracted the attention of the other visitors, who began to gather around, wanting to see what was happening. Even Abby, who was sitting at a distance, immediately recognized the young man by his last name, Song. Sam began to talk about what he knew about her poor family and promised that if she became his girlfriend, she would not need for anything. However, Molly refused and calmly returned to work, an answer Sam clearly did not expect. Being rejected by the poor girl in front of everyone, he felt humiliated and immediately became furious. Then he grabbed a glass of water from the table, poured it down his trousers, and then loudly called out to the restaurant owner. The owner, having learned that young Master Song had problems, hurried over. Sam claimed that Molly had allegedly spilled water on him and now had to clean it up herself. Hearing this, the restaurant owner, without any investigation, immediately accused the girl and even tried to hit her. But just as his hand was raised to slap, it was intercepted by another person, and that person turned out to be Mike. The next second, Mike threw the man back, and with a loud crack, the restaurant owner's body fell onto the table, which immediately shattered. The restaurant staff and patrons watched the scene with wide eyes. Molly was also shocked, because she did not expect to see her brother here at all. Abby, in turn, saw Mike's strength in action for the first time and was also involuntarily surprised, because the plump man was thrown aside so easily. Meanwhile, Sam came closer and pointed threateningly at Mike, demanding that he not interfere in other people's affairs. After a short punch from Mike, Sam instantly found himself on the floor. A sharp pain pierced his entire body, as if several ribs had been broken. However, he continued to threaten, reminding that he was the heir to Sun Properties Group. However, at that moment, another voice suddenly rang out, the words sounding so unexpected that Sam's face instantly turned pale. It turned out that Abby had already come closer and openly sided with Mike. Upon seeing the girl from the Sue family, Sam immediately realized that his family company could not compare to their influence. So, before she had time to call her father, the young man hurriedly left the restaurant. Watching his pathetic escape, Abby nudged Mike playfully and remarked that he was now in her debt. At that moment, Molly grabbed her brother's hand and insistently asked him to leave there as quickly as possible. Mike wanted to ask a lot of questions, but first of all, he wanted to know why she was working in such a place at all. The girl briefly replied that they pay well here, and then the hero realized that because of his past irresponsibility, his sister had to endure such humiliation. Molly then quietly reminded him that she still hadn't changed, and only then did the hero realize that she was still wearing her maid's uniform. He immediately turned to Abby and asked if she knew of a clothing store nearby. The girl immediately perked up and confidently declared that he had come to the right place. After that, they went around several stores together. Abby quickly picked out several outfits for Molly. All the items looked very nice, and Abby and Mike immediately appreciated how well they fit Molly. However, upon seeing the prices on the tags, the girl turned pale and hastily said that she could not afford such purchases. Then Abby noted with a smile that her brother was now a rich man and could afford not only a few outfits, but even an entire store. Molly asked in surprise how this was possible. The girl explained that Mike now works as a bodyguard for her family and receives a very high salary. Although Molly still didn't fully understand the situation, she eventually allowed her brother to pay for the clothes. Once the purchases were completed, Mike transferred $200,000 to his sister and asked her to keep part of it for personal expenses and give the rest to her mother. Molly, of course, wanted to know much more, but Mike knew that he couldn't tell her about his transformation. So the hero came up with another story about a meeting with a mysterious master who taught him martial arts. However, Molly was not so naive. The girl said outright that she was not going to believe such fairy tales. For a few seconds, the brother and sister looked at each other in silence. And then Molly suddenly laughed and said that she was not going to pry into the truth. Then the girl added that she would definitely tell their mother about everything. After these words, she was about to leave. Mike followed her and asked her to convey his apologies to his mother, but his sister noted that he should say such words in person. As soon as he got into the car, Abby started teasing him about how such a strong martial artist was afraid of his own little sister. Mike didn't answer, but his slightly flushed cheeks betrayed his embarrassment. As the car pulled away, Abby began to list in detail how many times she had helped him that day. Mike understood the hint perfectly and immediately told Uncle Juan to follow the girl's instructions and take them wherever she wanted. Hearing this, Abby exclaimed happily and ordered to go straight to the shopping center. Her favorite pastime in life was shopping, and now she could enjoy it to the fullest. Since she was in a great mood, the girl went shopping almost until the evening. As a result, Mike, while acting as a bodyguard, simultaneously became a bag carrier. It wasn't until the back seat of the car was completely covered with bags that Abby finally decided she'd had enough for today. However, before Uncle Juan could start the car, Mike suddenly felt something was wrong. However, the hero calmly noted that nothing serious was happening and they should just go back. In fact, his feeling turned out to be correct, because at that moment they were already being watched. The road to the Sioux family's villa passed through the suburbs, and everything was quiet on the way there. However, on the way back, the car had to brake sharply, the cause being a tree trunk that was lying right in the middle of the road. Juan got out of the car with concern to inspect the obstacle. Mike followed him. While they were trying to figure out how to remove the tree, suddenly there was a sharp whistle, and Juan saw a bullet flying towards him. However, the protagonist instantly used his power and stopped the flying object right in the air. When it became clear that it was a bullet, Juan's legs gave way and he fell to the ground in horror. For Mike, such attacks looked like just a cheap trick, but since the enemy decided to play such a game, the hero was ready to respond in kind. With that thought in mind, Mike increased the flow of energy and sent the bullet back towards the shooters. Two killers hiding in the forest were instantly struck in the head without even having time to understand what had happened. Meanwhile, Abby, who had been dozing in the car, heard a noise and opened the door to see what was going on. Upon seeing her, Juan immediately became worried and hastened to warn her that it was an ambush and that she needed to return to the car immediately. At first, Abby didn't understand what he was talking about. However, as soon as he finished speaking, she smelled a strange smell, and when she realized it was sleeping gas, it was already too late. Her body instantly weakened and she lost consciousness, and almost simultaneously, Juan also passed out under the influence of the gas. The only person left conscious was Mike. After some time, when the gas began to dissipate, unknown men came out to the car. Abby, coming to her senses, saw several strangers. They were holding guns in their hands and heading straight towards her. In a semi-conscious state, she began calling for Mike, but he was not there. The group's leader, noticing the girl's condition, did not waste time looking for a bodyguard and ordered his men to take Abby away first. But it was at this moment that the hero calmly asked whose people they were and where they came from. Hearing Mike's voice, the attackers turned around sharply and realized that they had fallen for a diversionary tactic. However, noticing that he was alone, they quickly calmed down. The leader immediately ordered his men to attack him all at once. However, in Mike's eyes, these people were just small enemies, and he calmly plucked a few leaves from a nearby tree. The leaves in his hands instantly turned into blades, and with their help, the hero easily broke through the defenses of his opponents and dealt with them instantly. The leader, watching this, was shocked. He could not believe that someone was capable of injuring people with just leaves. In Longshan City, he had never heard of a master of such caliber. Meanwhile, Mike again asked the question of who sent them. He deliberately left this person alive, hoping to get information. However, his opponent chose death rather than reveal his plans. Realizing that he couldn't win, he bit into the poison capsule hidden in his tooth. A few seconds later, the man began coughing up blood. The next moment, he fell dead to the ground. The trail ended there, and Mike felt a slight disappointment. Since the enemy was already dead, all that remained was to return home. The hero used a small portion of his strength to break the tree that was blocking the road. Immediately after that, he returned to the unconscious Abby. He then directed some of his internal energy into her body to counteract the effects of the sleeping gas. At that moment, Abby suddenly opened her eyes. When Abby opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was Mike standing next to her, his hand on her chest. The girl instantly jumped up in surprise. She crossed her arms over her chest and screamed in panic, accusing him of indecent behavior. Then he calmly explained that he was actually saving her, and Abby, looking around, noticed several masked people nearby. The sight made her face turn pale, and when she learned that they were murderers who had come for her, her fear only increased. Uncle Juan soon came to his senses. Seeing what was happening, he reacted with extreme surprise. Mike then told him to take everyone back to the Sioux family villa first, adding that he had already removed the tree blocking the road. Returning to the mansion, the hero told Axel and Theodore in detail about what had happened. This news greatly alarmed Mr. Sioux. The hero also noted that each of them had a leaf-shaped mark on their wrist. Mike noted that such a group would hardly use such primitive methods. Hearing this, Theodore frowned slightly, as he had a vague feeling that he had seen a similar sign somewhere before. The very fact of the attack made Axel worry about his daughter's safety, so he decided not to allow Abby to leave the house anymore. Mike agreed that extra caution was needed now. Then, as if remembering something important, he asked Axel to help him find some bracelets made of high-quality jade. Although the owner of the house did not quite understand what they were needed for, he immediately instructed his secretary to deal with this issue. Soon she brought a whole box of jade bracelets. At first glance, it was clear that these were high-quality decorations. Mike was very pleased and took the box. Axel suggested that the hero was going to bless the jewelry to protect against evil spirits. However, Theodore noted that such things are usually said only by charlatans, since real masters do not believe in such superstitions. These words made Axel feel a little embarrassed, and he hastened to apologize for his ignorance. That same evening, Mike took the box to his room. Having selected several of the best jade items, the hero invested some of his power into them. After that, he took one of the bracelets and went to Abby's room. The girl opened the door with obvious irritation and asked why he had come so late. Then Mike simply handed her the bracelet and asked her to always wear it on her naked body from tomorrow onwards. Hearing this, Abby crossed her arms awkwardly over her chest and suspected him of having strange intentions. After that, Mike returned to the living room with a box of jewelry where Theodore and Axel were still there. Mike decided to show them what these items were really for, so he asked one of the bodyguards for a gun. After that, he threw the jade pendant into the air. The next second, the hero shot at him. The bullet instantly left the barrel, but it seemed to collide with an invisible barrier and bounced off to the side. Theodore, seeing this, could not hide his amazement. The pendant, meanwhile, fell back into Mike's palm, but immediately broke into several pieces. Axel realized that such protection could only withstand one attack, but even one such protection meant saving a life. Mike then explained that it was just a trial run, meant for one use. Real bracelets can withstand 4 or 5 attacks. He gave the highest quality bracelet to Abby in advance, since she was the main target of the enemies. The hero distributed the remaining jewelry between Theodore and Axel, and also asked that one each be given to his mother and sister. Axel immediately ordered that this request be carried out. Soon the next morning arrived. Abby looked at the bracelet Mike had given her for a long time, but she still couldn't figure out how it could be useful. She eventually decided that the piece simply didn't suit her style and so didn't wear it. Moreover, she didn't like the fact that Mike was forcing her to wear it, so she decided not to do it on principle. When the girl went downstairs, she ran into her father, who was sitting in the living room drinking tea. The man immediately asked where she was going. Abby stubbornly replied that she wanted to go out and have some fun. Mike wasn't going to interfere at first, but he noticed that the girl hadn't even put on the bracelet he'd given her, so he had to accompany her personally. However, the girl only became more irritated by the fact that Mike was following her relentlessly. Soon they arrived at her favorite shopping center. On the way, the girl constantly tried to think of a way to get rid of the intrusive bodyguard. Abby asked the hero to give her at least a day so she could be alone, but Mike refused. The girl was incredibly irritated by all this. Abby didn't understand what kind of fun there could be if this guy was constantly following her. Finally, an idea occurred to her. She said that she was going to the toilet, expecting that the man naturally would not go there after her. Mike remained waiting outside, knowing full well that she was up to something. Abby herself was sure that the hero would not be able to compete with her, so she decided to get out into the street through the window. She started to climb down the windowsill, after which she decided to lean against the fan. And right at that moment, her shoe suddenly flew off her foot, and Abby was close to hitting her bare foot into the fan. However, at that moment, the girl suddenly heard strange sounds below. As soon as Abby climbed through the bathroom window and was outside, she found Mike standing calmly below. The surprised girl asked him when he managed to get there, while standing on the external unit of the air conditioner. Mike noted that it didn't matter when he arrived now, since she had another problem. He said in surprise that he could see everything she had on under her dress. Hearing Mike's words, Abby instantly blushed all the way to her ears. With a piercing scream, she hurried back into the toilet. The plan to get rid of Mike failed completely. Mike, meanwhile, waited calmly outside, waiting for Abby to come out of the restroom. The girl couldn't help but notice how tired she was of this disgusting guy. While he was standing at the door, he suddenly heard a voice calling his name. Turning around, Mike saw a girl. It was Alice. She studied in the same class with him at school and was considered a real goddess of the school. Beautiful, with a wonderful figure, a gentle character, and a friendly smile, she was liked by almost everyone. In his past life, Mike was also one of those who secretly admired her. Moreover, when he was wandering the streets, Alice once helped him. A curious Abby, noticing the stranger's appearance, stuck her head out of the toilet door to see what was going on. Alice noticed her too, and smiling, asked Mike if this beauty was his girlfriend. She noted that the hero made a good choice. Before he could answer, Abby screamed out that she would never be his girlfriend, and then immediately hid behind the door again. Then Mike asked Alice how she was doing, and she replied that she was doing well. In turn, she was surprised at how much Mike had changed. His current behavior was not at all like his previous one. He only briefly noted that time changes people. These words made the girl laugh. She teased him, saying that he spoke like an old man. They talked a little more, after which Alice suddenly remembered an important event. In a few days, it would be her birthday. She said she was going to have a party at her house, and since they had met by chance, she invited Mike to come. Then Alice said with a smile that she would not interfere with their date any longer, after which she said goodbye and left. As he watched her go, Mike felt a strange feeling. He didn't think he would meet again the people he considered long lost in the past. At that moment, his phone rang, and when he answered it, he heard Juan's worried voice. He reported that Abby had stolen the car keys and driven away, even though she didn't have a driver's license. But Mike calmly replied that he would deal with it. Meanwhile, Abby herself was already driving down the road. The feeling of freedom delighted her. However, shortly after she left the mall, a police siren sounded behind her. Abby immediately panicked as her run ended too quickly. A police car stopped her car. The officer got out of the car and reported that he had received a report of an unlicensed driver, after which he asked to see his documents. The girl found herself in a difficult situation. She had no rights. The police officer realized that she was not going to provide documents, so he asked her to get out of the car. And it was at that moment that she heard Mike's satisfied voice. He noted that if a person doesn't know how to drive, then they shouldn't get behind the wheel and ruin the reputation of all other female drivers. Abby immediately realized that he was the one who told the police, and she screamed in rage that she would kill him someday. As a result, she had to go to the police station and pay a fine. After this, the girl was incredibly angry at Mike for 3 days in a row. For all 3 days, she sat locked in her room and did not even come out. And at some point, Mike knocked on her door. Abby's face still remained gloomy. Then the main character asked her if she was still angry with him. The girl angrily told him to leave and slammed the door. But the hero continued knocking and said that he needed her help. Only after hearing that Mike was asking for a favor did the girl reluctantly open the door and ask what was the matter. At first, she didn't show much interest. However, when Mike promised to fulfill one of her conditions if she agreed to help, Abby immediately became interested. At the time Alice had appointed, they both arrived at the luxurious mansion. Abby wore a beautiful green dress to the event. Her condition was simple. From that moment on, Mike no longer had to follow her around all the time. He agreed without hesitation. However, He chuckled to himself. Even if he didn't officially accompany her, he could still secretly observe. When Alice saw Mike at the party, she was genuinely happy, with her father, Liam, standing next to her. The hero immediately congratulated the girl on her birthday. Alice was the first to greet Abby and introduced herself as Mike's classmate. Abby responded with a haughty look, declaring that she was Mike's owner. This word made Alice confused. She cast a strange look at Mike, deciding that he had some unusual preferences. At that moment, Mike himself was mentally scolding the capricious girl. Soon, a young man's voice was heard in the hall, addressed to Mike. Although several years had already passed, he immediately recognized this voice. It was Robert. In his past life, Mike suffered greatly from this man and could not forget those humiliations. As soon as he saw him, Robert began to mockingly tease his former classmate. He asked why the great young master Mike was dressed so simply today and whether he was tired of pretending to be rich. Abby, standing nearby, found it disgusting that these people were openly mocking their former classmate. She noticed that there were too many annoying flies here and suggested that Mike go out for a walk. These words struck a chord with Robert, and he instantly became furious. Only now he looked closely at the girl next to Mike. Seeing her beauty, he felt a strong envy. He couldn't understand how poor Mike could be next to such a beauty. Sam and his father Santiago soon arrived at the banquet. As soon as he appeared in the hall, Sam immediately went to Alice, congratulating her on her birthday. On the outside, the girl appeared polite and friendly, but inside she remained cautious. She had long heard about his bad reputation. As Sam raised his glass, his gaze accidentally fell on Mike in the crowd of guests. He immediately realized that this was the guy he had met the other day. He still hadn't forgotten how he had humiliated him in the cafe with the maids, and vowed to take revenge the next time they met. While he was thinking about how exactly to do this, Robert came out of the crowd and approached him with a glass, trying to start a conversation. He introduced himself and hinted that he would be glad to befriend such a person. Seeing this, Sam immediately came up with a cunning idea. He said that he was ready to accept friendship, but first Robert had to do him one small favor. He will need to publicly embarrass Mike in front of all the guests. Hearing this proposal, Robert felt as if he had found a treasure, and a plan instantly appeared in his head. Meanwhile, Mike and Abby were sitting at the banquet table. The girl had already managed to eat several pieces of cake, not caring at all about how she looked. At that moment, Mike heard Robert calling him, and he even waved his hand vigorously. The hero understood perfectly well that nothing good could be expected from this man. But curiosity still got the better of him, and he decided to see what kind of intrigue he had planned. Coming closer, he noticed Sam nearby. Before Mike could say anything, he suddenly started shouting loudly, accusing him of stealing. Sam pretended to be pushed and fell dramatically to the floor. Robert hurried to pick him up and also started shouting, accusing Mike of first stealing the thing and then hitting the man. Mike was simply surprised, not expecting that adults were capable of coming up with such a primitive setup. Abby immediately looked up from her food and wondered why there was so much noise around her. Robert started screaming loudly and attracting the attention of everyone around. A crowd of guests quickly gathered at the shouts. This was exactly the effect the two schemers were aiming for. Mike just said with a smile that normal adults wouldn't do something like that. Robert began to accuse Mike even more loudly, claiming that he had had a bad character since his school days and, it seemed, had not changed at all. The noise caught Alice's attention, and she quickly pushed through the crowd and stood in front of Mike, trying to protect him. The girl said that there was clearly a misunderstanding here and that Mike was not capable of such a thing. However, Robert immediately objected, saying that she was too naive and did not know the true character of this man. He loudly accused Mike of daring to steal right at Alice's birthday party, despite his official invitation. While everyone's attention was focused on the accusations, Martin quietly approached Mike from behind, a gold watch in his hand. He pretended to have just taken them out of Mike's pocket and immediately announced loudly that they were his, and that they had ended up in Mike's possession. After this, he triumphantly announced that they were looking at a real thief. Mike just chuckled coldly, saying that they were doing a very ugly job. Then, with a slight movement of his hand, he pushed Sam away, and he found himself on the ground again. Seeing this, Santiago immediately rushed forward and began to loudly complain, demanding an explanation. He started asking Sam if he was okay. The father and son were guests of honor at the celebration, so the situation immediately became tense. The man rushed to help Sam up and declared that if Mike did not kneel and ask for forgiveness, he would be immediately sued. Mike continued to provoke the impudent man. Sam joined the conversation. once again calling the hero an impudent thief who even dared to turn up his nose. At this point, Abby, who had been watching what was happening until then, finally couldn't take it anymore and intervened. She noticed with irritation that the regular clock was making too much noise. When Martin saw her, his face instantly turned pale. He never expected to meet the daughter of the Sue family here. Abby pointed out sharply that the watch was still in Sam's hand and threatened that he could easily be accused of slander. She then turned to Mike and complained that he shouldn't waste his time on people like that. The girl was also unhappy that this forced her to interrupt her cake tasting. Her arrogant tone irritated those around her, and one of the elders of the G family coldly asked who she thought she was. Abby calmly replied that it was not surprising if they did not know her, since not everyone was worthy of meeting her. Then Santiago ordered the security to take the impudent girl out of the hall. Abby had been treated with respect all her life, so being treated like this was something new and even a little funny. She said with a grin that she had never been forcibly taken away from an event. The G family's guards quickly surrounded her, but the protagonist came to her aid. Mike immediately pulled the girl back and stood in front of her. He was clearly going to see who would dare touch her while he was here. Sam, seeing that the others did not recognize her, pretended that he also did not know anything, and ordered the guards to teach Mike and the girl a lesson. Mike immediately asked the girl to hide somewhere. However, as the guards approached, they suddenly felt a strong current of air around Mike. The atmosphere changed dramatically. Sam was surprised to think that this man might be a martial arts master. As the energy flow intensified, many illusions of Mike appeared in front of the guards. It was impossible to tell which of them was real. While everyone else was trying to comprehend what was happening, the hero immediately rushed into the attack. As a result, the guards were quickly defeated one after another. Everyone present stood frozen in shock, unable to believe that an entire crowd couldn't handle just Mike. Watching this from afar, Abby was delighted and loudly called on Mike to teach a lesson to the old man's impudent son and himself. Santiago tried to maintain a semblance of confidence, claiming to be the chairman of Sunji Corporation. Before the old man could finish speaking, Mike sent Santiago flying with one blow, causing him to lose consciousness. Meanwhile, Sam watched as his father was hit, but he could do nothing. Then the young man simply began shouting threats at Mike, which of course did not make any impression on the hero. In response, the protagonist calmly said that his silence did not at all mean cowardice, and certainly did not give anyone the right to insult him. However, the guy tried to object, saying that Mike was just a martial arts master and should not act so arrogantly. Nevertheless, the hero suddenly rushed forward, grabbing Sam by the head with one hand and Robert with the other. The next second, he forcefully slammed their foreheads together. The blow was so powerful that both of them instantly experienced blackouts and lost consciousness. Meanwhile, the host of the party, seeing how his daughter's birthday was turning into complete chaos, was completely at a loss. Alice, who was standing nearby, tried several times to explain to him what was happening, but each time the man only brushed her off. It was at this noisy moment that Axel entered the banquet hall with his men. Upon entering the hall, the man immediately walked towards Mike and with obvious respect folded his hands in a welcoming gesture. He apologized for his late arrival and asked what exactly had happened. Seeing Axel's attitude towards Mike, Sam couldn't hide his surprise. Meanwhile, Santiago came to his senses. However, upon opening his eyes, he immediately shuddered, seeing Axel in front of him. His shock became even greater when the other turned to him and asked him, for his own sake, not to escalate the current conflict. Hearing this, Santiago was struck by lightning because the girl he had ordered his men to drive out turned out to be Axel's daughter. Realizing what had happened, the man immediately fell to his knees in front of Mike, begging him to forgive him for his own ignorance. However, the hero had no intention of dealing with such people and ordered him to simply disappear. Now the truth has finally come out. Mike was not a thief at all. On the contrary, it all turned out to be just a scheme to frame him. Moreover, when the guests learned that he was so respected by the Sue family, many girls immediately began to look at him with admiration. Soon they surrounded the hero, trying to get to know him better. Seeing this, Abby truly hated the main character. However, it was at that moment, when Mike found himself in the center of this attention, that he heard Santiago call his name again. Axel said that someone from the Martial Arts Alliance wanted to meet with him. Mike took this opportunity to escape from unwanted female attention. When they walked away, he admitted that this was the first time he had heard of an organization called the Martial Arts Alliance. Theodore explained to him that they were talking about the Chinese Martial Arts Alliance, a structure directly subordinate to the country's top leadership. This time, their visit was connected with the people who attacked Abby a few days ago. After this, Linu led Mike to a separate room. When the man opened the door, there were about 5 people inside. The person sitting on the sofa was Ben, the head of the second branch of the Longshan City Martial Arts Alliance. Next to him was a slightly younger man, and it was obvious that he didn't take Mike seriously at all. However, Ben calmly explained that they had received information that Axel's daughter was being hunted. They also learned that Mike was now responsible for Abby's protection. That's why they decided to come and meet in person. After hearing this, the hero only briefly noted that he understood what was said, after which he immediately headed for the exit. In the eyes of those around him, this behavior looked like a clear disrespect for Ben, so the man standing next to him immediately became furious. However, Ben still told Mike some important news. He said that the people who were chasing Abby belonged to the He Huang gang. In addition, the man warned that this organization possessed great power, so the hero should not fight them alone. After listening to all this, Mike still said that he could handle it and immediately left the room. After he left, the man became indignant again and said that this guy was too arrogant and therefore needed to be taught a lesson. However, Ben only chuckled calmly and noted that a person with such a character would sooner or later find trouble for himself. He also added that Mike would still not be able to become a rival. Meanwhile, the hero returned to the banquet hall to find Alice. There had been such chaos around him before that he hadn't even had time to give the girl a birthday present. When the girl took the box from Mike's hands and opened it, there was a jade pendant inside. Alice immediately noticed that the gift was too expensive and she could not accept it. But the hero explained that value did not matter. He only asked the girl to always carry the pendant with her, since in a dangerous moment it could protect her. Meanwhile, Abby was watching the scene from the sidelines, and seeing them talking, she pouted her lips in displeasure. After the birthday party ended, a masquerade ball was held, and for Alice's sake, Mike agreed to stay. Soon it was time for the ball, and the main character, as expected, came wearing a mask. Around the corner, he was immediately met by Abby in a bunny costume, and yet Mike was still able to recognize her. Although the girl was not visible under the suit, the hero felt that it was her. After some time, Alice herself finally appeared in the hall. She was wearing a beautiful dress with wings attached to her back, making her look like a fairy. Looking at her, Mike couldn't help but admire her. Soon, Alice invited the hero to dance together. At first, Mike wanted to refuse because he didn't know how to dance, but the girl enthusiastically said that she could teach him. In the end, they held hands with a smile and walked into the dance hall together. Abby clearly didn't like this. Now she started to think that all guys were real pigs. While they were both completely immersed in the music, the lights in the hall suddenly went out. At first, the guests thought it was part of some kind of festive surprise. Suddenly, in the darkness, a piercing scream from young Mrs. Abby was heard. The girl was frightened and demanding to be let go and calling Mike for help. Hearing this, the hero immediately pulled away and left Alice alone. However, as soon as he took a few steps, 2 unknown men approached the girl. They tried to grab her and take her away with them, which made her very scared. But just as the men reached out their hands to her, the jade pendant Mike had given her suddenly burst into a bright light. It seemed as if an invisible barrier had instantly formed around the girl. Realizing that the kidnapping would not be easy, the perpetrators immediately abandoned the idea and quickly disappeared. Although they failed to take Alice away, they did manage to capture Abby, and it turned out that the leader of the He Huan gang, Elijah, was behind this. Meanwhile, the kidnappers were about to leave the scene when Ben suddenly discovered them. Tension immediately arose between the two sides, and as the opponents stood facing each other, the atmosphere became increasingly tense. It was at that moment that Mike slowly approached them, and the hero calmly said that he was not at all interested in their old grievances. However, now they have only 2 options. Either they immediately release Abby, or he himself will teach them good manners. However, Ben had a personal feud with Elijah, so he stated that he wanted to deal with him himself and asked the hero not to interfere. In response, Mike said that he would give him exactly 1 minute, after which the young man stepped aside. As soon as the time had passed, Ben gathered energy in his palms and rushed towards Elijah, hoping to be the first to deliver the decisive blow. However, his attack was unexpectedly easily repelled by the enemy. After this, a tense fight ensued between them. The opponents exchanged blows, each man using his own unique techniques. However, in the end, neither of them was able to gain a clear advantage. The situation only changed when Elijah suddenly pulled a dagger from behind his back. He swung it sharply into Ben's left chest. The head of the department, accustomed to observing the rules of martial arts, did not expect such a vile reception at all. Just as Elijah was about to deliver another blow and finish off his opponent, he was suddenly thrown aside by a powerful kick. The hero had no intention of watching their squabbles any longer. Seeing Elijah beaten and barely able to stand after just one punch from Mike, Ben couldn't hide his shock. Just recently, he looked down on the hero and even thought that he would die sooner or later. Now the man realized that Mike's strength far exceeded his own. Meanwhile, Elijah struggled to his feet and, gritting his teeth, glared at the hero. Then he quickly took out some kind of pill and swallowed it. At that very second, his body began to change rapidly. In a matter of moments, he grew several times in size and became significantly stronger. Feeling the power, the man declared that after taking the pill given to him by his ancestor, everyone here was nothing more than flies to him. However, he didn't have time to finish speaking. The next moment, Mike literally disappeared before his eyes. When the hero appeared again, he was already standing right in front of the enemy. Elijah didn't even have time to react. One powerful blow from Mike drove him into the ground. Watching this scene, Ben involuntarily got goosebumps. Mike's strength seemed simply monstrous. The man could not understand why he had never heard of such a master before. However, while Mike was fighting, Abby had already been tied up and pushed into the car. When the girl came to, she had difficulty realizing that she was in an extremely dangerous situation. Soon the car stopped in some secluded place. One of the kidnappers looked greedily at the helpless girl next to him and began to say that he could no longer restrain himself. However, another man stopped Old Man Zhu. Hearing this, Abby was in despair and mentally cursed Mike, thinking that she was in trouble again because of him. Suddenly, a strange energy rushed past the car. One of the men asked in surprise what it was. However, his partner only mockingly stated that it seemed that he was completely clouded in the head and could not see any light. Only Abby recognized the green glow. It seemed to her that she had seen it before. And indeed, it was Mike. Using his power, the hero instantly lifted the car into the air and then sharply lowered it back down. The people inside almost lost consciousness from fear. The driver immediately lost his temper. He threw open the car door, pulled out his gun, and decided to deal with the intruder. At this point, the man began shooting, confident that he would quickly deal with the enemy. However, Mike's speed turned out to be much higher than the speed of the bullets, and not a single shot even touched him. Then the bandit decided to threaten differently, and reminded the hero that the girl was still in their hands. After that, he opened the car door. The bandit pulled out a half-fainting Abby and held her close, threatening to throw her into the sea if Mike came near. The hero calmly asked if he would really dare to do this, but the man immediately declared that of course he would dare. After these words, the man threw the girl into the sea. Seeing this, Mike immediately went on the attack. With one blow, he brought down a powerful blow on the bandit's neck, causing him to stagger and almost lose consciousness. Then the hero, without hesitation, jumped down after the falling girl. Luckily, he managed to catch her just a moment before she touched the water. Mike pulled Abby close to him. Activating his aura, he began to climb back up the cliff with her. In a semi-conscious state, the girl only felt that this man's embrace was surprisingly warm and reliable. Abby was soon safely returned to the Sioux family residence. There, Mike asked Axel if there was any news. He reported that all the attackers, including Elijah, took poison and committed suicide. Unfortunately, all threads of the investigation have been broken again. Sometime later, Abby came to her senses and asked Mike to come over. The hero immediately came to check her condition and asked if she was feeling better. However, the girl clenched her fists, attacked him, and with tears began to accuse him of breaking his promise to protect her. Axel immediately reprimanded his daughter and reminded her that without Mike's help, she could have found herself in a much worse situation. However, contrary to expectations, Mike himself did not make excuses. Instead, he calmly admitted his guilt and gently apologized, promising that next time he would be sure to protect her properly. Hearing this, Abby was momentarily at a loss. She even found it strange that this stubborn man had suddenly become so polite. Then Mike calmly asked her to get off him. The girl instantly blushed with embarrassment, jumped up, and immediately sat down next to him. At that moment, Axel cleared his throat and announced that the old master wanted to see Mike. Soon, Sam and Santiago appeared in the living room. Both men bowed and began to apologize, admitting that they had made a serious mistake. After this, Santiago carefully placed a bank check for $10 million on the table and offered to accept it as a token of apology. Mike warned them that if any of them dared to approach his sister again, he would not be so lenient. Hearing this, Sam immediately began to bow respectfully and assure that they would never dare to do such a thing again. As they left, Mike thought for a moment and came to the conclusion that Johnny seemed to have started to act as well. A little later, Mike decided to go to an internet cafe to look for information. And indeed, he soon saw a message that Johnny had officially announced his return from abroad. Then Mike immediately bet 10 million on himself and asked the users who they would be willing to bet on. This news quickly reached the Sue family. When Theodore reported it to Axel, he confirmed that it was indeed true. Moreover, it became known that Johnny also responded to the challenge and bet 10 million on himself. Meanwhile, Abby's disgruntled voice could be heard nearby, continuing to complain and demand to be let out for a walk. It was at that moment that Mike's phone suddenly rang, and notifications about new bets began to appear on the screen. There was a message that Axel had bet 20 million on Wuji's victory, and after reading this, Mike couldn't help but laugh. Abby noticed that he was completely ignoring her and immediately became angry that he dared not pay attention to her. Just as she was about to give him another dressing down, Mike quickly pretended to listen attentively. However, he was clearly expecting something and was quietly muttering to himself, asking if that person had already appeared. When they returned to the mansion, Abby again asked him what he was doing and if he was going to go with her. The girl continued to run around the garden and happily told her that she wanted to find the very hero who once saved her. And then Mike suddenly pulled the girl into the house. He felt a murderous aura and understood that Johnny was somewhere nearby. However, Abby continued to chatter non-stop and stated that if that hero were nearby now, he would send Mike flying with one blow. At that moment, Mike put a jade bracelet on her wrist, and the girl immediately began to complain that the jewelry looked ugly. However, the hero calmly asked the girl not to throw any more tantrums and promised that this bracelet was only needed for her protection. Abby instantly blushed at such closeness and, embarrassedly agreeing, still left the jewelry on her hand. About 4 hours passed. Abby lay on the couch and loudly hummed a love song, while Mike became increasingly impatient. He couldn't understand why Johnny hadn't made his move yet, so Mike decided to push the situation a little. He suddenly called Abby and said that he saw a rabbit. The naive girl immediately jumped up and asked with interest where it was. Mike replied that the rabbit had just been near the flower bed and was probably still there. Unable to contain her curiosity, the girl immediately ran outside. Quickly throwing off her slippers, she ran to the desired flower bed. Soon she was running around the yard calling the rabbit, promising to treat him to a carrot. However, Johnny still did not show up. But then suddenly a strange gust of wind blew past. Abby also felt that something was wrong and looked away in surprise. Meanwhile, Mike had already realized that his prey had finally begun to act. He easily repelled the assassin's first attack. When Johnny made a second attempt and rushed forward with a scream, Mike suddenly realized that he was the target of the attack. Johnny used the cold sting technique, delivering a swift, straight strike. However, before he could complete the move, one punch from Mike sent his face flying to the side. The killer rolled on the ground several times and realized with horror that his ambush had completely failed. Mike calmly noted that the attack was not bad, but the enemy was still too weak for him. Realizing that he couldn't win in the usual way, Johnny pulled a grenade out of his pocket and decided to use a smokescreen. After the explosion, everything around was covered in thick smoke, and the killer decided that he could now escape safely. However, to his surprise, Mike continued to follow him literally on his heels, which completely confused Johnny. He couldn't understand how an ordinary martial artist could move at such speed. Moreover, with just a few simple movements, Mike almost managed to capture him alive. Having no other choice, Johnny decided to try his last trick. The moment Mike landed after another jump, the enemy suddenly disappeared. The hero looked at the nearby lake and calmly noted that his opponent was quite fast. About 30 minutes passed. Johnny was almost suffocating at the bottom of the lake, confident that he had managed to escape. He understood that if he had stayed there for a few more minutes, he would have simply suffocated. However, the moment he finally surfaced, he was unexpectedly greeted by Mike's calm voice. The hero noted with a grin that holding his breath for so long was quite a skill, and it seemed like the enemy had really trained a lot. The next day, the entire internet cafe was buzzing with the news. One man, who had bet his entire fortune on Johnny's victory, cried out in despair that it was impossible and that he had lost everything. People passing by just glanced at each other and quietly whispered that they were looking at yet another person who had gone crazy because of gambling. Soon, a message appeared on the forum, stating that Johnny had died in a fight with Wuji and his body was found in the river. However, the events of the previous night developed quite differently. Johnny was stunned when he saw that Mike was able to stand on the water. The killer thought feverishly, trying to understand how he could defeat such an opponent. Mike calmly noted that the enemy was quite good at hiding the aura of his techniques. Hearing this, Johnny changed his tone and offered to pull him to the shore first, because the water in the river was too cold. Mike agreed to help without much hesitation and began to pull him to the shore. But at that moment, a sinister smile appeared on his face. Suddenly, he pulled out a dagger hidden in his sleeve. Johnny rushed at Mike with a furious cry, hoping to kill him with a surprise attack. But he didn't expect at all that his blow would be stopped by just 2 fingers. At the same time, Mike noted that such an opponent was not worthy of even trying to kill him. Realizing that it was impossible to cope with this man, Johnny pushed off the ground sharply and jumped high into the air. Now he was desperately trying to find a way to escape. However, Mike simply threw the dagger that ended up in his hand. With one precise movement, he struck the enemy. Johnny's body immediately fell into the water with a loud splash, after which Mike turned around and was about to leave. And then suddenly his phone vibrated. Opening the message, he saw a text from Molly. The girl asked when he was going to come home because his mother missed him very much. After reading this, Mike only quietly promised himself that this time he would definitely come back and would not allow his loved ones to suffer anymore. That same morning, the hero was riding the subway. In his hand lay the black card that Abby had handed him. It contained money won at the forum, a whole 500 million. Handing over the map, the girl said that he should return home as soon as possible and then help her find the very hero who saved her again. Remembering this, Mike laughed and thought that if Abby suddenly found out that he was that hero, she would probably be furious. After some time, an announcement was made over the loudspeaker that the train had arrived at the final station. Mike noticed that the girl sitting next to him was still fast asleep. Then he gently woke her up and told her that they had already arrived and it was time to go. Meanwhile, a group of suspicious people were already standing at the station exit, discussing whether the woman from the Yu family had been found. Soon they approached Mike and the girl. The leader noted in a cold voice that they had met again. He then demanded that the elixir of rebirth created by the master alchemist be handed over to him. In return, he promised to spare their lives. A girl named Sydney quietly told Mike that he had better leave because it was too dangerous here. However, the gang's leader, Hank, was immediately outraged that they dared to whisper right under his nose. Realizing that the situation was becoming critical, Sydney quickly grabbed Mike's hand and tried to run away. Hank immediately ordered his men to capture them, adding that no one would leave here today and that the elixir might be with that guy. Meanwhile, Sydney told Mike that she would try to delay the enemy and he should take the chance and escape. The girl didn't want an innocent person to suffer because of her. However, Hank had already caught up with them and released a skill in the form of claws, warning her that she better think about her own life first. Sydney instinctively pushed Mike aside. She then activated a protective shield and declared that she would not allow the enemy to achieve their goal. But then Hank's blow shattered the shield, after which he declared that the genius of the Yu family lived up to his reputation. But she was unlucky enough to meet him. Without showing an ounce of nobility, he kicked the girl in the stomach. Mike watched the proceedings in silence. Hank snatched the vial of elixir from Sydney and declared that according to legend, this potion could even bring the dead back to life. However, he added that the girl's grandfather would not live long enough to see it in action. Sydney was still trying to warn Mike and asked him to run, explaining that Hank's eagle claw technique was too dangerous. However, Mike's path was already blocked by several bandits, who were confident that they could easily deal with him. But the next moment, the hero easily scattered them to the sides, contemptuously noting that in front of him were only annoying flies. Seeing how the guy single-handedly dealt with several people at once, Hank was very surprised. Then he decided to intervene personally and rushed at the enemy. However, Mike only remarked contemptuously that he had asked for it. Then he delivered one powerful blow with all his might. The impact literally threw Hank from the front of the car to the very back, with shards of broken glass flying all around. The heavily wounded bandit spat out blood and muttered in horror that the person in front of him was probably an immortal-level master. He even began to wonder if this young man was the legendary Master Fu Yun. Mike simply replied that he didn't know any of these people. After that, he turned to Sydney and calmly asked if everything was okay with her. The girl confirmed that everything was okay with her. Realizing that he was facing an incredibly powerful master, Hank quickly returned the elixir and began to apologize, admitting his mistake. When it was all over, Sydney carefully asked for the elixir to be returned to her, explaining that it was of great importance to her. Mike handed her the bottle, noting that such a valuable item should not be kept in such a fragile glass container. However, as soon as he said this, something unexpected happened. Their hands slipped, and the bottle fell to the ground, breaking. They both stared in horror at the broken glass. The next second, Sydney suddenly grabbed Mike's leg and began demanding compensation for the destroyed elixir. At the same time, the girl thought that now all she could do was use her main weapon, her appearance, hoping to achieve what she wanted. Having put her plan into action, Sydney asked what they should do now, as the elixir was the only hope to save her grandfather. Hearing this, Mike immediately agreed to help and assured the girl that he would try to fix everything and help save the old man. Then Sydney took his arm and thanked him, at the same time mentally noting that her brother's advice had actually worked. Mike also looked at her carefully and noticed an overly confident expression on her face. Meanwhile, when they left the station, someone was already waiting for them. It turned out to be Noah, Sydney's older brother, and he immediately became interested in the person standing next to his sister. Sydney was a little embarrassed and explained to her brother that she would tell him everything on the way. During the trip, Noah couldn't resist asking if they had managed to get the elixir of revival. Realizing that it was no longer possible to hide the truth, Sydney admitted that something unpleasant had happened. The car jerked suddenly in surprise, and Sydney fearfully asked her brother to drive more carefully. After some time, they arrived at the Yu family's house. Just at that moment, the two doctors who were examining Mr. Yu shook their heads and reported that the old man's condition was hopeless. Hearing this, Sydney couldn't hold back her tears. The girl immediately rushed into the house. Meanwhile, Noah grabbed his head and began to blame himself. He was worried that the broken elixir would destroy not only his grandfather, but also all the hope of the family. Meanwhile, Sydney rushed into the room and called her grandfather. Seeing his granddaughter, the old man was delighted and noted that she had returned just in time. However, one of the men said that Noah had already called them and told them that the elixir was no longer available. Then the girl guiltily admitted that everything went wrong. At this point, the old man's son, Finn, abruptly intervened in the conversation and reminded him that he had warned him not to send Sydney on this dangerous mission. Now the medicine was lost, and he didn't understand how they were going to save his father. Despite these words, Sydney calmly stated that she had in fact found a master who might be able to help her grandfather. Then the girl pointed to the door and introduced Mike. He looked at the guests with an indifferent expression on his face. However, seeing the guy in front of him, Finn laughed loudly and declared that she was crazy for bringing some boy from the street. He also asked if she was ready to bear the consequences if something happened to the old man. The others also had doubts, because the young man looked too young to inspire confidence. Nevertheless, Mike silently approached the bed and, using a special technique, began to examine the master. A moment later, he reported that the old man's energy channels were blocked due to internal injuries, so the blood was circulating poorly. As soon as he finished, Finn flared up with rage and demanded to know who had allowed him to touch his father. However, at that very moment, he felt as if he was struck by an invisible force. The man flew against the wall and lost consciousness. Everyone present was shocked, because Finn was considered the strongest fighter in the family. Now it has become clear that this young man is not so simple. Realizing this, his brother, Carlos, folded his palms in respect and asked if his father's illness could be cured. However, the doctor spoke out against it, saying that what was happening was absurd and that he had never seen such a way of checking the pulse. As he left, the doctor added that the old master's illness had already reached its final stage and that now even the elixir of rebirth could not save him. These words again made Carlos wonder whether he should trust the unfamiliar young man. Sydney also asked worriedly if her grandfather was really beyond saving, but Mike calmly replied that it was only a minor internal injury. Hearing this, the girl visibly sighed with relief. Then the young man added that the cure would only require a small fight, and upon hearing this, everyone around was at a loss. Carlos asked in surprise what exactly he meant and whether the Yu family had offended this master. Sydney also didn't understand why this guy was saying such things. Then Mike explained that this was the easiest way to treat it. At that moment, Finn came to his senses and, running up, began to loudly complain. He accused the young man of daring to hit him without permission. However, he didn't have time to finish speaking. Mike sent him aside again with one blow. The force of the blow was so enormous that even Finn himself was amazed, trying to understand where this guy got such power from. Meanwhile, Mike silently lifted the blanket and began the treatment. and soon dull thumping sounds could be heard throughout the room. As Sydney watched her grandfather being treated, she felt a great deal of anxiety and wondered if she had misjudged this man. Meanwhile, Mike continued to strike, directing the energy of his palms into the old man's body and gradually opening one meridian after another. Although this method seemed extremely unusual to everyone, no one else dared to interfere. Soon after a series of blows, the old man fell back onto the bed, the procedure finally coming to an end. However, Finn again began to speak sarcastically that Noah had killed the head of the family and now hoped to get the post of head of the clan. However, at that moment, Sydney suddenly noticed that her grandfather had come to his senses. Indeed, the old man opened his eyes, sat up and coughed several times. Then Finn quickly asked how he felt. The old master replied that he felt fine, and then happily reported that his internal injuries had completely disappeared. After this, Mike got ready to leave and explained that the master's channels were now completely cleared, and his cultivation level had even increased. Upon hearing this, Carlos stated that if Mike ever needed help, their family would do everything possible. After thinking for a moment, Mike asked if they had any old medicinal herbs, preferably over 100 years old. Then, citing personal matters, Mike soon said goodbye and headed for the exit, and Carlos ordered that he be escorted out. After this incident, Sydney began to have special feelings for Mike. Meanwhile, the hero himself was finally able to return home. Sitting in the car on the road, he remembered how in his past life his mother worked hard all her life for him, and in old age she was killed. Then he firmly decided that in this life he would definitely do everything so that his mother would live in a big house, calmly and happily, without needing anything. At this time, his sister Molly was taking out the trash and suddenly heard someone call her name. Turning around, the girl saw her brother. Then she cried out joyfully that he had finally returned. When they arrived home, their mother, Clarissa, carefully placed food on her son's plate and asked him to eat more, reminding him that he was still growing. She then added that if he ever ran out of money, he should be sure to tell his mother. Mike didn't answer, just quietly looked at the burns on his mother's hands. These scars appeared more than 10 years ago, when the 8-year-old boy was helping his mother prepare dinner. When the fragrant soup in the pot was finally ready, he decided to take it to the table himself. However, the child was too small to hold the heavy pot. Clarissa was in bed with a high temperature and upon waking up, immediately began to blame herself for having fallen asleep instead of cooking dinner. With difficulty, she rose to her feet and hurried into the kitchen to see her son struggling to hold a heavy pot of boiling soup. Frightened, the woman screamed and rushed towards the boy. Seeing that her son could get burned, she hastened to support the pan. However, it was too late. A scream was heard and the saucepan fell to the floor, spilling hot soup. Despite what had happened, Clarissa did not scold her son at all. Instead, she immediately asked with concern if he had been hurt. Mike, with tears in his eyes, replied that he was fine, but noticed that his mother's hand was badly burned. Only then did the woman notice that blisters had appeared on her hand, but she calmly said that it was nothing. Returning his thoughts to the present, Mike blamed himself, remembering how often his mother suffered because of him. So this time, the young man plucked up his courage and decided to apologize to his mother. However, Clarissa only smiled softly and asked in surprise what kind of nonsense he was talking about. Then Mike explained that he had recently managed to earn some money and that he was going to pay off their debts tomorrow and then buy a new house. Hearing this, the mother immediately objected that it was already difficult for him to earn money, but the hero looked at her and said that he wanted her to live better. These words touched Clarissa, and she thought of her late husband, noticing that their son had really grown up and become very intelligent. Seeing Mike's sincerity and his changed attitude, the woman no longer argued and agreed. The next day, Mike went to the sales office early in the morning to look at houses. Looking around the area, he thought that the environment here was good and the prices were not too high, so his mother would not refuse to live here. At that moment, a luxury car pulled up to the building, and passers-by immediately began to talk about it. It turned out to be a Ferrari F12 TDF, and people were surprised to notice that the rich live completely differently. Then a girl named Christy got out of the car and coquettishly told her companion that she liked the building. The man's name was Sean. He was the director of a department at Honghai Corporation, and he told her that she could choose whatever she wanted. When they entered, the people around them began to whisper, wondering how such an unattractive man could get such a beauty. Hearing such talk, Christy only looked at the people with disdain and called them trash. Meanwhile, inside the sales office, a consultant was telling Mike about a new residential complex. The area boasted beautiful natural surroundings, convenient transportation, and amenities comparable to a four-star residential complex. In addition, most of the apartments were already booked before the official opening, so now there are only a few available. After listening to her, Mike immediately clarified that he wanted to buy an apartment with windows facing south, preferably with a view of the Longjiang River. At that moment, Christy noticed a familiar face. She took off her sunglasses and called out to Mike, who didn't recognize her at first and asked who she was. Then the girl reminded him that her name was Christy, and that they had studied together in high school, where he had always followed her around. Then she asked him if he was planning to buy an apartment here, since his family, as far as she remembered, had always been very poor. Only after these words did Mike finally remember her. Once upon a time, this girl cunningly lured money out of him, convincing him to give her the family savings for sweets and trips to the cinema. At the same time, behind his back, she told others that this guy does everything she says, like an obedient dog. Now, looking at her, Mike was surprised to notice how much her appearance had changed, as if she had undergone plastic surgery. Meanwhile, Christy told the seller that they would take the apartment. However, Mike was faster. He took out a black bank card and calmly said that he was buying this apartment himself. Therefore, the employee had to explain to the girl that this was the last apartment in the building and that this gentleman had already decided to buy it. She offered to show them other options, which were also very good. Having failed to achieve her goal, Christy began to mock Mike again, declaring that she knew him well and remembered how poor his family was. The girl then added that she and Sean were different from him, because they could contribute half the amount at once. Mike then asked to make the payment by card right in front of them, but when the card was inserted into the terminal, it showed that the transaction was declined. The consultant awkwardly informed me that the card was not going through, possibly due to an incorrect PIN code. Seeing this, Christy became even more proud that he was just trying to impress, because he never had that kind of money. Mike calmly assumed that this could be a banking system error and decided to transfer the money via mobile transfer. A moment later, the transfer of 5 million yuan was successful. The saleswoman immediately announced that the payment had been received and congratulated him on the purchase of his new home. Hearing this, Christy became very angry and wondered in bewilderment when this loser managed to get rich. Then she turned to her boyfriend. The girl began to complain capriciously that she still wanted this particular apartment. Sean, completely captivated by the girl, only calmly replied that he would fulfill any of her wishes. After this, Sean called the sales manager by name and ordered him to come over. He explained that he wanted to buy an apartment, but one of the employees was not understanding enough, so he had to intervene. Realizing that he was dealing with an important client, the manager immediately assured him that he would definitely find a solution. Approaching Mike, he tried to resolve everything peacefully and suggested that the young man give up the apartment. In return, he promised to find another option and even give a 20% discount. However, the hero shook his head and refused. After this, the manager abruptly changed his tone and irritably stated that there was no point in letting things get into trouble. He reminded him that the residential complex belonged to the Yu family's company and asked if the boy was willing to insult such an influential family. Just then, Noah walked past with several of his assistants discussing work matters. While discussing the fact that sales of the Flower Garden residential complex on the riverbank were going very well, he suddenly noticed an argument. Taking a closer look, the young man immediately recognized Mike. He also heard the manager threatening him, demanding that he give up the apartment for the sake of the Yu family's interests. Then Noah immediately came up and greeted Mike with a smile, saying that he was very glad to meet him there. Seeing this scene, Sean was stunned and didn't understand why the young master of the Yu family showed such respect to this man. Meanwhile, Mike, having met an acquaintance, calmly asked for help in sorting out the situation. He explained that he wanted to buy an apartment with a river view, but encountered some difficulties. After listening to him, Noah immediately became gloomy and angrily asked who dared to disrespect the benefactor of the Yu family. Then Sean had to come forward and admit his mistake. He apologized to Mike and admitted that he had failed to understand who he was dealing with. However, Noah had already made his decision and announced that from that day on, Sean was banned from all Yu family properties. Then Sean turned around sharply and angrily hit Christy in the face. He called her a stupid woman and blamed her for all the problems. He then clutched his head in despair and complained that it was all over, because he had insulted the Yu family and now his life was ruined. Meanwhile, Noah was still apologizing to Micah, because the Yu family considered him their savior. He didn't expect that something like this would happen. The very next day, Mike's family moved into a new house, and Clarissa couldn't hide her surprise when she looked at the luxurious home. At that moment, their neighbor suddenly appeared at the door and immediately introduced himself. He said he lived next door and his name was Luke. The man then looked at Molly and asked if they had met before because her face seemed very familiar to him. This attention immediately irritated Mike, and he called his neighbor aside to talk. Luke approached, but immediately heard a warning that if he came close to his sister again, the consequences would be serious. Then Mike noticed the black eye and asked if he got it from trying to pick up a girl. After this, Luke smiled mysteriously and said that since they were now neighbors, he had to tell them something important about this place. He leaned closer and whispered that he thought the house might be cursed. According to him, on the very first day after moving, he felt a strange atmosphere. At night, he was constantly overcome by a cold, as if a wind was blowing nearby. One day, during a severe thunderstorm, he was lying in bed and suddenly felt a woman hug him. She was trembling and muttering something incoherently, which made him very scared. Since he lives alone, he screamed in panic, pushed her off the bed, grabbed the table lamp and started fighting back. He said he no longer remembered what happened next. Mike immediately realized that his neighbor was trying to avoid details, so he deliberately clarified whether he really didn't remember anything. Luke then admitted that the next day the woman returned with reinforcements and demanded double payment and compensation. Hearing this, Mike couldn't stand it and lightly hit him on the head, calling him an idiot, but the neighbor hastened to explain that that was not all. He said that that same night he was awakened by a knock on the window, and when he approached it, he saw a woman with long black hair and in a white dress. She cried pitifully and asked to be let inside. After this, strange things started to happen. The lamp by the bed would go out by itself, the tap would turn on unexpectedly, and the smell of garlic would sometimes appear in the room. Realizing that such stories could frighten his mother and sister, Mike decided to deal with the problem. So he offered Luke to stay at a hotel for one night and leave him the keys to the house. The hero confidently promised that he would sort everything out by the morning. That same night, Mike went to Luke's house. Using his skills, he tried not to fall asleep and carefully watched what was happening. After a while, he felt a familiar ghostly aura and realized that the spirit had indeed appeared. Soon, the entire room was filled with cold energy. Then Mike was the first to speak to the ghost and calmly asked how he could help in the middle of the night. A female figure appeared in front of him and quietly said that she had no legs, and with these words, an icy wind burst into the room. Then the spirit asked if he could give her his legs. However, Mike remained completely calm and in response only asked why she needed legs if she didn't even have shoes. It was the first time the ghostly girl encountered a person who wasn't afraid of her, so the girl froze in place for a moment. Meanwhile, Mike calmly lay back on the bed and declared that if nothing else happened, he was going to go back to sleep. However, the girl immediately went on the attack. She decided that if the hero did not give her the things voluntarily, she would simply take them by force. However, it all ended with Shelley covered in bumps and lying on the floor, throwing a tantrum. The girl thought indignantly that this man was beating even ghosts, and doing it so painfully that she wanted to bite him to death. Meanwhile, Mike simply grabbed her hand. He then directed a stream of spiritual energy straight at her forehead. Then an instant change occurred. The girl returned to her real appearance. In front of him stood a beautiful girl with neatly tied hair, who now looked much less frightening. Then she asked, a little embarrassed, why he wasn't afraid of her. Mike replied that there was nothing to be afraid of here. Moreover, she didn't look like an evil spirit at all, so he didn't understand why the girl was scaring people. The hero then asked her name, but Shelley demonstratively turned away, asking why she should tell him anything at all. But when she noticed that Mike raised his hand as if he was going to hit her again, the girl immediately decided to tell everything. Then she admitted that her name was Shelley. She was a freshman, and at that time the site of this building was just an abandoned vacant lot. She remembered that one day she decided to take a shortcut and accidentally fell into a hole, breaking both her legs. There was no one nearby. After this, Mike thought for a moment and asked what she had been thinking about before she died and whether she had any unfulfilled wishes left. Shelley then explained that since childhood her parents had been constantly arguing, they later divorced, and she remained to live with her father. However, her father was addicted to gambling and alcohol, so he often scolded and even beat her. Later, when the girl was already in high school, a tragedy occurred. Her father, while drunk, fell into the lake and drowned. At that time, the mother could not afford to raise another child, so it was the older sister who dropped out of school and started working. According to Shelley, her sister was the best sister in the world, and it was her that she thought about just before she died. After turning into a ghost, the girl immediately wanted to go to her sister to find out how she was living, but this turned out to be impossible. After hearing this story, Mike felt sorry for the unfortunate girl, so he told Shelley that he knew a way to help her leave this place. Hearing this, the girl was surprised and hopefully asked if he could really get her out of here. A strong hope appeared in her eyes, as if she had been waiting for this for a very long time. Mike then explained that there are different paths in the cultivation world. For example, fallen cultivators sometimes continue to practice. They can take over other people's bodies or use rare treasures to recreate a physical shell. However, there is another way, to completely renounce the body and cultivate only the soul. In this case, they leave their mortal body forever. Such practitioners are called ghost cultivators. Therefore, he declared that he was able not only to help her leave this place, but even to give her a chance for a new birth. Hearing this, Shelley promised that if he saved her, she would be ready to do anything for him. Mike then explained that her soul was currently extremely unstable and could dissipate at any moment. If this happened, her consciousness would disappear. However, he has a special cultivation technique. If a girl begins to practice it, her soul will become stronger and gain enormous power. When the soul becomes strong enough, it will be able to form its own body and be reborn. However, Mike immediately voiced a condition. He said that he was ready to help, but only if the girl obeyed his orders. In response, the girl asked in confusion if he wanted her to call him master and become his servant. However, the hero only said that she could simply address him by his name. After this, Shelley promised that when she became human again, she would dedicate her entire life to him. She said shyly that she would become his property. Then Mike asked her to stand up straight and look down at her feet. After that, he asked her what she saw. The girl replied that she only saw her own feet. She thought there was nothing special about it. Then she suddenly understood the hint, and her face immediately darkened. She felt like Mike was just making fun of her figure. However, the hero calmly confirmed this and noted that she had no forms at all, so he did not understand what she could offer him. Shelley became furious at these words and screamed so loudly that the entire building shook. People around started asking each other in fear if an earthquake was happening. The next morning, Luke, who had been waiting outside all this time, saw Mike open the door. Then he joyfully ran up to him and immediately asked if everything was okay and if he had seen that entity last night. Mike calmly replied that he had already dealt with this problem and, as promised, that female ghost would never appear before him again. After this, Luke looked inside the room and was surprised to notice that the atmosphere had actually changed. However, the hero himself only sighed quietly because he had not slept at all night, the reason being Shelley, who did not give him peace. The thing is, Mike spent the whole time teaching her cultivation techniques last night. As a strange light enveloped Shelley, the hero sealed this power inside her body. Then he asked how she was feeling. In response, the girl joyfully shouted that she had succeeded. After that, Mike reminded her that he had promised the man who lived there to take her away from here. However, Shelley asked for help in seeing her sister first. Then the hero explained that she couldn't go far now, so it would be better to write down everything she wanted to say, and he would convey it himself. After this, Mike decided to contact Noah. Soon he received a reply that the girl had been found. Her name was Mary, and she worked at Xian Ming Xuan's establishment. Then Mike remembered that he had heard about Xian Ming Xuan back in middle school. It was the most elite tea house in the entire city. In his past life, a single cup of tea there could cost tens of thousands, and he only dreamed of one day getting to such a place. When the hero entered, the employee asked what kind of tea he would like to buy and whether he would brew it himself. Mike immediately responded by asking if there was a girl named Mary working there. The employee explained that Mary was the best tea master and asked if he would like her to make tea for him. After this, the girl immediately called out loudly to Mary, saying that a visitor had come to see her, and a moment later she came out from behind the screen. She looked at the stranger curiously and asked who he was, but Mike did not answer directly. Instead, he handed her a note and explained that he had been asked to deliver this message. When the girl read what was written, she was greatly shocked. Mary excitedly asked where he got this note from. Mike had to lie. He explained that a girl in an ambulance once asked him to pass on this message. Hearing this, Mary could no longer hold back her tears. She immediately recognized the handwriting and realized that it was indeed her younger sister who wrote it. Then the girl fell to her knees and began to sob inconsolably, thinking with pain that she had not been able to take care of her poor sister. Mike watched this and understood her feelings better than anyone else. At that moment, the manager of the tea house, Marcus, approached them and immediately hurried Mary, informing her that two masters had already arrived. However, the girl apologized and said that she was not feeling well today, so she asked to send someone else. But the manager said that she shouldn't pretend. Even if she felt bad, she would still have to endure it and go up to the guests. However, Mary refused again. She apologized again and explained that she really was not in a condition to make tea right now. Hearing this, Marcus became completely angry and loudly asked if she was planning to lose her job this way. At this point, Mike decided to intervene. He calmly offered to let the girl rest and brew tea for the guests instead of her. The manager looked at the stranger and asked if he really knew how to brew tea because it was not as easy as it seemed. In response, Mike confidently stated that he could handle it, since he had previously learned this from Mary. After that, he took the girl by the hand. This gesture made her blush slightly. Mike then turned to the manager again and pointed out that in her current state, Mary would not be able to provide proper service to the guests anyway. Marcus was hesitant, not knowing if he could trust this man, but eventually he agreed and told him to follow him. So Mike was brought to VIP room number 1, where two people were already sitting, animatedly arguing. One of them was a master of internal martial arts, Elder Zhang, and the other was a master of external techniques, Elder Li. Meanwhile, Mike calmly sat down at the table. Then he skillfully took the tea out of the box with both hands and began to prepare the drink, while listening to their argument. Elder Li argued that internal energy cannot exist indefinitely. In his opinion, true strength lies in tempering the body. Elder Zhang couldn't take it anymore and jumped up, continuing to argue. He declared that Elder Li didn't understand the essence of martial arts at all. However, in the midst of the tension, Elder Zhang noticed that the aroma of today's tea seemed particularly unusual. He turned to Mike and looked at the young man with interest. Soon, he was completely captivated by the subtle aroma of the drink. The scent was calm and graceful, as if a person were immersed in an endless soft sea of clouds. Elder Zhang took the cup and took a sip. At that very moment, an electric shock of pleasure seemed to run through his body. The feeling was so strong as if he had entered heaven. The old man felt as if he could leave the mortal world right now, jump into the waterfall and become immortal. Elder Li also tasted the tea and immediately admitted that the young man's skill was truly impressive. Moreover, he assumed that he probably had some understanding of the martial path. Therefore, the elder asked him to express his opinion and answer the question of whether the external school was really stronger than the internal one. These words immediately touched Elder Zhang, and he again stated that at his age, the depth of understanding of martial arts could not be great. In his opinion, putting such a young man at the center of such a dispute is completely pointless. After this, the argument flared up again. Mike watched this and gradually began to get irritated. He even thought that it was no wonder why the tea house staff had such a hard time serving these guests, since they were constantly arguing. Finally, he decided to intervene and stated that, to put it bluntly, both elders were wrong. Meanwhile, Marcus, who had been eavesdropping behind the door, suddenly noticed that there was silence inside. Mary, meanwhile, was also quietly praying that Mike would be able to cope with the situation. Both elders stopped arguing and simultaneously turned to the young man. They were surprised to notice that their argument had been refuted by just one sentence, and so they asked him to explain his point of view in more detail. Mike then calmly explained that both internal and external techniques have their advantages and disadvantages. All martial arts in the world are based on principles. It is like hundreds of rivers that eventually flow into one sea and come to one path. Hearing this, both elders widened their eyes in surprise and immediately asked which path exactly they were talking about. Then Mike showed a little of his power and calmly said that it was about the path of eternity. These words immediately stunned his interlocutors. However, Elder Zhang expressed doubt and incredulously noted that by eternity he probably meant immortality. Mike explained that in martial arts there is no absolute strength. There is always only a stronger level. The elder objected again, saying that young people tend to have unrealistic ideas. In response, Mike noted with a touch of mockery that those who consider themselves strong are often the most conservative. After he directed a stream of his true energy towards the willow branch outside the window, Elder Li asked in surprise what he was going to do. However, Mike didn't answer. He just thought that he would have to demonstrate his strength to make them believe. Mike then calmly used his internal energy and easily plucked a willow leaf from a distance. Then he snapped his fingers sharply, sending the sheet of paper whistling through the air before slamming into the table like a dagger. Both men were so shocked that for a moment they were speechless. Mike then explained that the willow leaf was an example of inner strength. After that, he took a spoon and sharply thrust it into the table, instantly splitting it in half. Then he calmly added that this was already an example of external force. This completely stunned the two elders, and they immediately exclaimed that only a true martial arts master could do such a thing. Mike just smiled, but chuckled to himself, thinking that these people were clearly underestimating him greatly. Elder Zhang had already realized that the person in front of him was a true master, so he immediately apologized for his earlier rudeness. However, Mike calmly replied that he just wanted to prove to them that it was entirely possible to combine internal and external techniques. After this, Elder Zhang asked the young master's name. Mike politely replied what his name was. The elder then declared that a person of such status had no need to visit his humble tea house. However, Mike calmly explained that he knew one of the tea masters of this house. He was simply replacing her. Elder Zhang immediately understood who he was talking about and assumed he was talking about Mary. At that moment, the old man was already quickly calculating everything in his head. He realized that this connection absolutely had to be preserved. When Mike confirmed his guess, the elder thought that the relationship between Mary and Master Mike seemed to be truly unusual. Meanwhile, Marcus, who had not heard any sounds from the room for a long time, began to become very worried. He thought that such a long silence might mean that something bad had happened, and the two distinguished guests were about to explode with anger. When he saw Mike coming down, he immediately ran up to him. The man excitedly began asking how it all ended. Mike briefly replied that everything had already been settled. He had only argued with them a little and managed to convince them. However, Marcus still didn't believe him. In his heart, he was sure that this guy simply didn't understand who he was dealing with. Soon, Mike calmly said goodbye and said that if nothing else was required, he was leaving. The manager had no choice but to go upstairs himself. As he stood up, he muttered that it was all over and that he would lose his job today. Upon entering the room, he immediately began to apologize to the masters, explaining that the guy was a newbie and did not yet know all the rules. However, Elder Lee stated that if Master Mike heard such words, the consequences could be unpleasant. Marcus still didn't understand which Master Mike was talking about. And then suddenly the cup on the table flew into the air. At that very moment, the tea table itself split in half. Elder Zhang's face changed dramatically, and he even wondered if Master Mike had accidentally overheard what was said. To avoid taking any risks, the old man immediately jumped up and sharply ordered the manager to shut his mouth. Elder Lee also explained that Master Mike was the very young man he had just spoken of. Elder Zhang then declared that every time Master Mike came to the tea house, he must be greeted with respect. Moreover, the old man added that Mary had shown herself to be very good. Therefore, from now on, she will become the manager of this tea house. Meanwhile, in another corner of the tea shop, Mary confessed to Mike that every time she thought about her sister, she became unbearably sad. Then Mike tried to console her and said that Shelley considered the happiest thing in her life to be that she could be her sister. He also suggested that perhaps they might meet again one day. However, the girl replied that there was no point in comforting her. She saw with her own eyes how her sister's body was cremated, so returning from the dead is impossible. Mary wanted to add something, but ended up stopping mid-sentence. When she looked up to continue the conversation, Mike was no longer there. Nevertheless, the girl still quietly finished the sentence, thanking him. Meanwhile, in Mike's room, Shelley was circling curiously around the strange object he had just purchased. She kept asking what it was. Then Mike explained that he had bought a jade vase at the jade market and that it would now become her home. However, Shelley began to persistently question who he really was. She was curious why he had such power and where he learned all these things. However, Mike only asked in an irritated tone why she had so many questions. But the girl continued asking questions and added that she had heard that men often hide various shameful things in their rooms. Hearing this, Mike sighed helplessly, opened the jade bottle, and declared that the conversation was over. However, no matter how much he tried to persuade Shelley, she stubbornly refused to go inside. At that moment, his sister Molly's voice suddenly came from outside, asking if he was home, and they both jumped in surprise. So Shelley had to obey and reluctantly slip inside the jade bottle. Meanwhile, his sister outside the door warned that she had heard some noise. She added that if she found out that he was bringing suspicious women home, she would immediately kick him out of the house. These words made Mike break out in a cold sweat. but he tried to pretend that nothing was happening and asked why she was looking for him. Then the sister explained that a man named Noah was looking for him, and according to him, the herbs that Mike asked to find had finally been delivered. Hearing this, Mike decided to go out to him right away. At the same time, he quietly warned Shelley that she couldn't go outside yet. However, inside the bottle, the girl began to complain, declaring that she did not want to sit there and that this place was terribly uncomfortable. Meanwhile, his sister called him again and asked why he was taking so long. In the end, Mike was forced to simply leave the ghostly girl in the room and go outside. Noah handed him the box and explained that inside was a 100-year-old wild ginseng that the Yu family had helped him find. He then asked to check the product carefully, and Mike examined the root and immediately praised its quality. He noted that this old ginseng could already be considered a half-real, low-level spiritual plant. Noah politely replied that Mike had saved his grandfather, so he was a true benefactor to the Yu family. Mike thanked them for their efforts and said he was willing to buy the ginseng at a high price. However, Noah immediately objected that he was being too polite and that they could not under any circumstances allow him to pay for this. While they were talking, Noah pulled out an invitation and announced that in 3 days his grandfather would be turning 65. He then added that the family would be glad if Mike found time to come to the party, and the hero promised to come. That same evening, Mike released his true energy and began to reflect on how spiritual energy on Earth was extremely scarce. Therefore, in order to speed up cultivation, he needs rare treasures. At that moment, he felt like he was just one step away from a breakthrough. Then Mike, without hesitation, took the 100-year-old ginseng and began eating it raw. It was at that moment that Shelley poked her head out of the jade bottle. Seeing what was happening, the girl was shocked and thought that in front of her was actually ginseng. She couldn't believe Mike was eating it so calmly, like he was eating a regular carrot. However, soon the hero ate the entire root, and his strength increased significantly. An ordinary person would not be able to withstand the power of a 100-year-old ginseng. But Mike reminded himself that he was a cultivator who practiced the highest techniques, so he was able to instantly absorb its power. After some time, he slowly exhaled and calmly said that the breakthrough was complete. Mike then looked at Shelley and asked what she had said earlier. The girl, a little surprised, came closer and touched his forehead. She asked doubtfully if he really hadn't heard her and remarked that eating ginseng was like eating iron. At this point, Mike warned her not to disturb him during his cultivation in the future. However, Shelley hugged him and began to complain that she did not want to sit in a bottle all the time. She also wanted to go outside and walk. But Mike picked up the bottle and sternly ordered her to go back inside, adding that otherwise he would have to use her real name. Hearing this, the ghostly girl immediately became resigned. She reluctantly agreed and obediently returned to the bottle. After that, Mike went out to call his sister. Molly asked in surprise what happened. Then Mike patted her on the head and said that he wanted to tell her some news. He announced that this evening he was going to invite her and her mother to dinner at the most famous restaurant in the city. When the hero said this, the girl's cheeks turned slightly red. Later, the brother and sister arrived at the restaurant. It was the most famous establishment in the whole city. At the same time, the restaurant's security service received a notification that representatives of martial arts schools would be gathering there that day. The staff immediately confirmed receipt of the order via radio. Meanwhile, Molly remembered that the restaurant had been around for over 200 years and was considered one of the city's landmarks. Moreover, this place is famous not only for its history, but also for its incredibly delicious cuisine. That's why dinner here usually costs at least 30,000 yuan. Mike calmly pointed to the menu and ordered the most expensive set. The waitress confirmed the order. The total cost was 66,666 yuan. Molly thanked the waiter, and as she returned the menu, thought that her brother really was very rich. Mike himself also sighed mentally and thought that it was good that their mother had not arrived yet. At that moment, he accidentally overheard a conversation at the next table, one of the visitors asking another if he knew Master Zhou. The interlocutor confidently replied that he was clearly underestimating him. Some time ago, he had specifically visited young Master Zhou. Hearing this name, Mike immediately remembered that it was Josh. At this point, the waiter approached Molly and explained that the staff had accidentally seated them at a table that was already reserved. However, it was at this moment that one guy, David, noticed them. He immediately thought that Molly looked cute and decided to take advantage of the situation. So he deliberately pretended that he had bumped into her by accident. Molly was startled by the surprise, and her ears immediately turned red, and David took advantage of this and started a conversation. He stated that the girl looked unfamiliar and asked what family she was from, adding that he would definitely remember such a beautiful girl. Upon hearing this, Mike immediately realized that this man was looking for trouble, so he stood in front of his sister and replied that they were simply at the wrong table. He added that they did not belong to any family. However, at that moment, another young man in expensive clothes approached them. His name was Oliver. He was the young master of the Wu family and had already reached the middle stage of a martial artist. David immediately folded his hands in greeting and praised him for recently breaking through to the middle stage of a martial artist. Meanwhile, Molly quietly told her brother that they had better leave, but Mike calmly assured her that she did not need to be afraid. Meanwhile, David took out a business card and handed it to Molly, trying to continue the acquaintance. He politely asked her name and suggested that they become friends and meet up sometime later. However, Mike was faster. He intercepted the card, examined it carefully, and declared that he would accept it on behalf of his sister. This behavior made David very angry. He asked why Mike was interfering in the conversation, since he was not addressing him at all. But before he could do anything, Mike sent him flying with one punch. David slammed into the wall, spitting out a clot of blood. Hearing the loud bang, Oliver and the other guy immediately turned around and saw David lying on the floor. After this, Mike calmly explained that since they were so interested in knowing who he was, he could answer. He said that he was the girl's older brother and that his surname was Mu. Molly was completely confused at this moment because she did not understand when her brother managed to become so strong. Meanwhile, David, having experienced humiliation, began to swear loudly, indignant that Mike dared to hit him. Mike calmly replied that he hit him precisely because he wanted to. After this, another man, Carl, said that Mu's surname was unfamiliar to him and suggested that he simply lived in a hotel. Mike looked at his interlocutor and asked who had told him that he was living in a hotel. Hearing this question, Oliver even briefly wondered if this man was connected to the influential Mu family from the capital. It was at this moment that two girls came out of the elevator, and seeing David in this state, they asked in surprise what had happened. David, experiencing extreme anger and humiliation, shouted that he had never been subjected to such shame in his life. He then grabbed a nearby chair and rushed at Mike, declaring that no matter who he really was, he would still beat him up. However, before he could even get close, Mike sent him flying again with one kick. David's pitiful position now contrasted with his former arrogance. Oliver realized that the situation could get out of control, so he decided to intervene. He stepped forward and suggested that everyone stop the fight. Oliver added that Mike's sister was not a fragile princess at all and that what happened was just a joke. He then suggested a simple solution. The brother and sister should come up and apologize to David, after which the incident would be resolved. But Mike just grinned and replied that he didn't care at all about Oliver's reputation. Hearing this, the two girls were stunned. It was unthinkable to them that someone could talk about the Wu family's young master like that. Meanwhile, Oliver himself mockingly asked if his reputation really meant nothing to Mike. However, Mike's answer remained the same. Then Oliver finally stopped holding back and began to release his true energy and offered to have a duel. He stated that if Mike wins, he will be able to leave peacefully, but if he wins, the hero will destroy his own channels with his own hands. In response, Mike also voiced a condition. He stated that if Oliver could withstand at least one of his blows, then he would admit defeat. Seeing how tense the situation had become, Molly quietly tugged at her brother's sleeve and asked if he could win. Mike confidently replied that he had no rivals in this city and she should just believe in him. The girl immediately began to encourage him and asked him to be careful. Meanwhile, David and Carl loudly supported Oliver from the sidelines, urging him to deal with Mike quickly. Oliver decided to act first. He gathered energy in his palms and contemptuously called Mike trash, then rushed forward. However, just as he was about to reach his destination, the order to stop was suddenly given. At the same time, an unknown person hit him with his fist. Oliver barely managed to stay on his feet, and gritting his teeth, recognized his attacker. It was Sydney. The girl removed her hand and asked who he had just called trash. David was stunned by what was happening and did not understand why Sydney was protecting this unknown young man. Oliver stood up slowly and asked her with a grin why she was here. He reminded her that, as far as he knew, her grandfather was dying, so she should be with him. However, the girl immediately objected sharply and asked who had said such nonsense. According to her, her grandfather was feeling fine. At that moment, Noah emerged from the crowd and added that the elder was not only completely healthy, but would also be celebrating his 65th birthday in 2 days. Oliver became nervous when he saw it, because his father had been involved in the attack that destroyed the medicine. Therefore, he began to suspect that the Yu family was deliberately spreading false rumors. Trying to remain calm, he congratulated Elder Yu on his good luck and asked why they were interfering in his duel. Sydney only stated that she was actually saving him. She reminded him how recently his father had been beaten so brutally that he had fled in panic. Many began to wonder who this young man was, if he was capable of standing up to Hank, the famous hawk. Deeply humiliated, Oliver screamed loudly, demanding that these fabrications stop. Noah added that Sydney was exaggerating a bit, but Oliver's father was indeed defeated by young Master Mu. Therefore, he should not act so presumptuously. He also advised him to stop in time. After this, Sydney took a step forward and loudly declared that from now on, anyone who dared to touch Master Mu would become an enemy of the Yu family. Watching the girl, Mike realized that he no longer had to interfere. Oliver thought to himself, his family was in rivalry with the Yu family, but open conflict could destroy the balance between them. And all this was because of some unknown young man. At this moment, Carl and David stated that even if Mike was a guest of the Yu family, he had shown arrogance by challenging all the families. Oliver's head was literally boiling from what was happening. Deep down, he wanted to scream at these two idiots. He just wanted to have a meeting, but they were just creating new problems. Just then, Molly's phone rang. She answered and told her mother that they were at table number 68, after which the girl said that she and her brother would be coming down now. Then she pulled Mike by the hand and suggested that they leave. Molly didn't want to make any unnecessary noise or keep her mother waiting downstairs for too long. Sydney noticed a girl next to Mike and wondered if she was his sister. However, David, still unwilling to give in, again tried to block their path and declared that he would not let them leave. Mike just looked at him irritably and sent him flying again with one punch. After that, he entered the elevator. When the doors closed, Molly admitted to her brother that she now realized how incredible he really was. Seeing the expression on his sister's face, Mike remarked that when she said things like that, she should at least add a little emotion. Molly answered honestly that she didn't know how to do it. She tried to feign emotion and said with a forced expression that she was surprised at how amazing her brother turned out to be. The hero only thought to himself that his sister had absolutely no talent for expressing emotions. Meanwhile, 5 minutes earlier, a young man dressed in elegant clothes approached the reception desk. He greeted her politely and said he was there for Oliver's banquet, after which he asked what floor the event was taking place on. Seeing such an attractive man, the girl behind the counter involuntarily blushed and replied that he needed to go up to the 5th floor. He thanked the girl politely and nodded slightly. After that, he and his partner went to the elevator. The elevator slowly began to ascend to the 5th floor. Peter's companion May asked curiously why the young master was wasting his time in such a small place. Peter replied that the strength of any country lies in its youth. According to him, it is young people who represent the future of the era. When the elevator doors opened, he suddenly came face to face with Mike and his sister. Peter's gaze lingered on Mike for a moment. Suddenly, an interested smile appeared on his lips. Noticing this, May asked what happened. However, Peter only replied that nothing special. Coming out to the crowd, he greeted everyone warmly and said that it was a great honor for him to be present at this meeting. Oliver, seeing an unfamiliar face, politely asked what business he had come for. At the same time, he had already managed to notice the stranger's unusual aura and realized that he clearly did not belong to any of the city's families. He even thought to himself that he had barely gotten rid of one problematic person when a new one immediately appeared. Peter opened his fan again and introduced himself, saying that his surname was Lu and that he came from Jiangnan. Hearing this, Oliver calmed down a little and even thought that this man was much more polite than that strange young Master Mu. So he decided to carefully inquire about his origins and invited the guest to come inside and talk. Meanwhile, several girls couldn't help but sigh in admiration as they looked at Peter. Sydney, watching this, only thought with disdain how stupid it was to lose one's head so easily. Hearing her words, Noah teased her with a smile, reminding her that she herself looked exactly the same when she looked at young Master Mu. Sydney immediately turned away in embarrassment and quietly stated that it was not true and that he was making it all up. Peter explained that he had recently passed through the city and heard that the Wu family master was gathering all the youth of the city's martial families today. He had heard of the city's fame as a place where many talented people are born, so he decided to see their abilities for himself. Oliver liked these words very much, and he even thought smugly that this young man really knew how to speak beautifully. Therefore, he invited him to express his opinion about the abilities of those present. However, Peter suddenly said in a contemptuous tone that, in his opinion, everyone present here was trash. This phrase instantly infuriated everyone at the banquet. Meanwhile, Clarissa remarked with displeasure that if she had known how expensive the food they had ordered was, she would not have agreed to go to the restaurant with them. She sternly told them not to spend money so recklessly anymore. Then she started lecturing them again, reminding them that they spent too much time on their phones and that it was bad for their eyes. It was at that moment that someone quickly called out to Mike. It was Noah. Mike immediately asked what happened, and he, breathing heavily, reported that there had been trouble upstairs. Meanwhile, Oliver demanded an explanation from Peter, asking who he was and why he had come here to cause trouble. Peter repeated that he had already introduced himself. His surname was Lu, and he came from Jiangnan. He added that he wanted to see their skills in person. However, the rumors turned out to be greatly exaggerated, and their reputation was completely untrue. David immediately flared up and shouted that this insolent fellow should learn a lesson. Together with his men, he rushed at the guest, wanting to teach him proper behavior in society. But for Peter, this did not present any difficulty. He easily dealt with it with one hand. Then he noted with a sneer that the servant had already been defeated and asked if the real master was finally about to appear. Oliver replied that he was ready to test his skill himself. He gathered all his strength into his palms again and prepared to strike. Peter, remaining calm, asked if he was using the hawk's claw technique. After that, he struck with his palm and remarked with disdain that it was still not enough. One blow was enough for Oliver to realize with horror that he could not withstand even one blow. Peter turned to the others and declared that they must now admit the truth. The city's martial artists were nothing but trash. Sydney couldn't take it anymore and jumped forward, challenging him. She asked if he was Peter from the Liu family, who had decided to use the youth of their town as a stepping stone to his own fame. Peter replied that on his way west he passed through many cities of Jiangnan, then came to Jinhu, and from there arrived in this city. However, he said he was greatly disappointed with the city. One of the girls next to Sydney asked curiously who this man really was. Sydney explained that in every generation there are people whose talent far exceeds that of the average artist. The cultivation level of such candidates is always extremely high, and even the weakest of them is already a high-ranking master. After Sydney's words, the entire room fell into a stunned silence. She asked if he was afraid that if he lost, someone would get him removed from the list of candidates for the title of ruler. A young man standing nearby supported her, saying that Peter was too arrogant and should not look down on the masters. However, Peter only grinned and replied that he had been misunderstood. He said that for now he considered the youth of this city to be the weakest. This arrogance finally drove Sydney crazy, and she decided to challenge him personally. Peter folded his fan again and asked mockingly if she was really going to fight him. Sydney was the first to attack, admitting that she couldn't just stand by and listen to him insult the young masters of her city. Behind her, the crowd simultaneously shouted, asking her to be careful. The next moment, a bright flash lit up the air. When everything was quiet, Peter ran his hand over his face, wiping away a thin streak of blood, and said with disdain that it was too weak. The force of the impact was so great that the pressure of the energy even cracked the stone surface of the floor. Seeing this, the crowd was about to pounce on the arrogant stranger, but Sydney stopped them. She warned Peter that there was a genius in their city too, but they were just afraid that he would be too strong an opponent for him. Peter just chuckled and asked if there really was such a person in the city. People in the hall began to look at each other and ask each other if there really was such a master in their city. It was at this moment that the one they were waiting for appeared. Seeing his sister beaten and covered in bruises, Noah immediately rushed to her, helped her up, and worriedly asked if she was okay. He took out a small bottle and hurriedly handed it over, offering to take the 8 flavors of heaven pill. According to him, if her energy channels are damaged, the consequences will be very serious. Meanwhile, Peter looked closely at Mike again and asked if this was the man who had been called as reinforcements. Mike replied that he had heard Peter call the entire younger generation of city craftsmen trash and express his disappointment. Peter confirmed this and added that he now wondered if Mike would be able to make him retract those words. Mike declared that he would stand his ground, and if Peter could force him to take even one step back, then victory would be his. Peter was clearly interested in the enemy and warned in advance that he would fight at full strength. He even said that he wouldn't just make Mike retreat, but would send him flying. The energy he released resembled a giant white snake. The audience in the hall exclaimed in amazement. noting the incredible force of his blow and assuming that the protagonist was doomed. Mike, however, noted that this technique was reminiscent of the legendary Secret movie. It seemed to him that it was a multiple horizontal throw. But Peter sharply objected, saying that it was not a dragon at all, but the shadow palm snake technique. Mike just laughed confidently and said that the name didn't matter. He stated that the result would still be the same. After that, he released his own power and met the enemy's blow. At that moment, a roar went through the hall. To Peter's surprise, his shadow snake palm technique began to gradually dissipate. He couldn't understand how this was possible. When the energy completely disappeared, he himself was thrown back. Luckily, May managed to catch him. The old man immediately shouted angrily, demanding the name of the man who dared to wound his young master. However, Peter stopped him. Then he told him that he once met a man who could destroy heaven and earth with one blow. He noted that the force of Mike's blow was very similar and asked if he knew the man. Mike replied that he didn't know him and added that what had happened had already proven one thing. The city was much stronger than Peter had imagined. At this point, Noah called him for help again while he tried to force his sister to take the medicine. However, Sydney stubbornly refused. She complained that all the medicines he created were too strange. Despite his explanation that it was a great demon power pill that strengthens the body, the girl did not agree. She shook her head stubbornly and declared that she did not want to turn into a female King Kong. Noah tried to persuade her again, explaining that this time it was a normal healing remedy and that her energy channels were damaged. At that moment, Mike came up and patted him on the shoulder, saying that everything was fine and he would take care of it himself. As Mike approached, Sydney softened a little. She sat down tiredly on a chair and complained that her whole body ached terribly. Mike examined her and said that the injuries were indeed serious, but she shouldn't be afraid. Everything would soon pass. He then used his internal energy to heal her. Sydney felt a warm energy spread through her body and soon realized that her wounds had disappeared. She thanked Mike sincerely. Noticing that everyone around him was looking at him, Mike froze. He asked in surprise what was going on and why everyone was staring at him. Then Oliver gave him a thumbs up and thanked him, saying that Mike had proven to everyone that the students in this town weren't trash. David immediately supported him, saying that if news of this spread, it would shock the whole world, and the reputation of the city's craftsmen would grow. At this point, Peter coughed several times and turned to Mike. He admitted that he was incredibly strong and was surprised why his name was not on the list of candidates for the title of martial arts master. In Peter's opinion, with such strength, Mike is quite capable of competing for first place with the master from the capital. But Sydney said that Mike's talent even surpassed that of this master from the capital. Peter admitted that Mike's strength was impressive, but still warned that there were many outstanding masters hiding in the capital. Mike asked him how many martial arts masters there were in China. Peter replied that the exact number was unknown, but such masters were extremely rare, and he assumed there were no more than 20 of them. At the same time, there are many powerful families concentrated in the capital, and most of the masters of martial arts come from there. Masters of the overlord level are already considered the strongest. However, there are rumors that there are 2 in the capital who have reached a higher level. Mike recalled an ancient legend according to which, in the history of Chinese martial arts, there were people who reached the level of saints. Peter said that they shouldn't worry about such distant heights for now, since they were both still at the level of high-ranking masters. In his opinion, what is much more important now is which of the younger generation will be the first to reach the level of a master of martial arts. However, Mike listened to these conversations without much interest. This surprised Peter. By this point, his own body was already starting to give in. He felt that Mike's blow was incredibly powerful. If he does not return and take up meditation, his energy channels may be seriously damaged. So he folded his hands in a respectful greeting and said that after their meeting, he was finally convinced of Mike's extraordinary nature. He then invited Mike to visit Jiangnan province someday and be a guest of the Liu family. Even as he was leaving, he continued to fan himself, which only caused bewilderment among those around him. Meanwhile, Mike leaned towards Sydney's ear and quietly said that he was going to go downstairs since his mother was still waiting for him. Then Sydney turned to her brother and said that she would see young Master Mu off. Noah watched his sister leave and felt like his heart was about to break, because his little sister was already grown up. Several young members of the Wu family also said goodbye to Mike and wished him to take care of himself. As he pressed the elevator button, Mike thought that these people didn't know one thing. He was not a martial artist at all, but a cultivator. And the goal he is pursuing is much higher than some position as head of the martial arts union. Returning home, he immediately went to his room. Mike immediately opened the jade bottle and called Shelley. However, there was no response. Then he turned the bottle upside down and wondered where it had disappeared to. At that moment, a voice came from right behind him. Shelley said that she had already gotten outside a long time ago. Mike was surprised and asked how she did it. She explained that he himself had given her the basic cultivation technique of the Phantom Immortal. Since some heartless person locked her in a dark and cramped place, she had no choice but to practice constantly. After hundreds of repetitions of the technique, she suddenly felt inspired. It seemed to her that she could pass through the object that was holding her. She decided to give it a try, and it worked. Hearing this, Mike was amazed by the speed of her cultivation. He realized that she had already reached the state of materiality. It took her just one night to do this, and she repeated the technique several hundred times simply out of boredom, and eventually mastered the first level. Mike wondered if he had accidentally become the owner of a true genius of ghost cultivation. Shelley approached him and asked him, in a suggestive tone, if he thought she was amazing and wanted to compliment her. But Mike only replied that everything turned out well. Shelley immediately turned away, offended, and muttered that it was so difficult for him to give a simple compliment, and that his pride was to blame for everything. Mike then said that since she had already reached the state of materiality, he could teach her several ways to use the spiritual body. Shelley wondered what specific methods he had in mind. Mike patted the bed and invited her to sit down so they could discuss everything. However, she immediately misunderstood his words and cried out in embarrassment, asking what he was going to do. Mike replied that he was going to do exactly what she had just imagined. After these words, her imagination was instantly filled with indecent images, and she was momentarily confused. Noticing this, Mike asked what she was thinking about, and Shelley guiltily muttered that she was thinking about nothing. When she calmed down a little, Mike began to explain a new technique, the soul transfer technique. After about an hour of explanation, he suggested she try it. Shelley agreed and decided to first imagine herself as a tree. At that moment, her body was transformed. She turned into a lush tree. Then she decided to check if she could become an animal. Seeing the little piglet in front of him, Mike noted with obvious displeasure that Shelley clearly had problems with her sense of aesthetics. The girl immediately objected and declared that if she wanted, she could take on the appearance of a real beauty. After a few tries, she actually managed to transform herself. And, a little embarrassed, she turned to Mike, waiting for his assessment. However, Mike awkwardly looked away, noticing that her clothes were too revealing. Hearing this, Shelley immediately covered her face with her hands, feeling extremely embarrassed. At that moment, she felt a strange weakness throughout her body. Her legs buckled and she staggered, falling straight into Mike's arms, a feeling of fatigue and unusual heaviness in her body. Mike explained that the cause was the excessive expenditure of spiritual energy during the transformation. Shelley was still concerned about the possible side effects of her reckless use of power. But Mike reassured her, explaining that it was only a temporary drain on energy and that full recovery should take about 10 days. Shelley became visibly embarrassed by their closeness. She complained angrily that Mike had not warned her in advance about such a huge energy consumption. In response, he assured her that there were no serious problems, but for some time she would not be able to use the state of illusion and reality. Shelley asked what the point of the technique was, and Mike pointed out that it had little practical use. Hearing this, the girl completely lost her temper and angrily attacked him with reproaches. 3 days passed from that moment, and soon the day of the Yu family's old master's 65th birthday celebration arrived. Mike drove up to the banquet venue and asked the security guard if there was a festive event taking place there. The security guard confirmed this, but was surprised. In 10 years of work, he had never seen anyone arrive at such an important banquet on a bicycle. He was already beginning to suspect something was wrong, but before he could do anything, Elder Yu and Sydney came out to meet Mike. Following tradition, Mike presented the birthday boy with a gift and expressed his wishes for longevity and prosperity. Soon, Sydney took Mike by the hand and invited him to take a walk in the back garden, the elder watching this scene with a kind smile. The thought involuntarily arose in his mind that it would be wonderful to have a man like Mike as a future son-in-law. At this moment, the master's attention was drawn to the situation at the entrance. A guard stopped the representative of the Wu family, Hank, along with his son. Not wanting to spoil the atmosphere, the elder ordered the guests to enter, although he wondered what intentions might be hidden behind this visit. Meanwhile, in the living room, Sydney was chatting with Mike, slowly sipping red wine. She wondered how he had managed to achieve such a frighteningly high level of strength at such a young age. Mike replied that he simply continued to train hard and over time naturally achieved this result. These words left Sydney puzzled, and in her heart she could not help but admit her own sense of failure. She suggested that they call each other by their first names, since they were about the same age, and Mike didn't object. For Sydney, this seemed like another step towards rapprochement. Romantic fantasies about the future were already beginning to appear in her head. Her dreamy thoughts were interrupted when Elder Jong and Elder Lee approached them to greet Mike. Meanwhile, Hank finally found the man he was looking for. He took a glass of wine and, in the presence of all the guests, approached Mike. He apologized for the previous rudeness that occurred on the subway and expressed hope for forgiveness, offering a drink as a sign of reconciliation. Mike accepted the toast without further ado. Immediately after this, he drank the glass in one gulp. Afterwards, Hank headed towards Master Yu, conveying his father's greetings and care. The guests noticed that the Wu family members were drinking especially heavily today, raising toasts one after another. Hank soon declared that today was a rare event when representatives of influential families gathered in one place. He then touched on a sensitive topic, the weakness of the city's martial arts world, as their region wasn't even among the strongest in the province. He recalled the recent visit of Peter, who is 10th in line to the title of Lord of Martial Arts. Even more humiliating, he said, was the fact that the younger generation was unable to respond adequately to this insult. As he said all this, he glanced furtively at Mike, who was still sitting in his place. Hank was sure that by this point the wine had already taken effect. After this, he handed the floor over to his son Oliver. He wanted him to explain why the city's craftsmen found themselves in such a situation, and why people from outside were laughing at them. Oliver stated with a serious expression that the main reason for the city's weakness was the lack of a single leader. Hank immediately echoed this idea, noting that for many years the town's families had acted in disarray. Sydney couldn't listen to it anymore. She noticed that their duet looked so well coordinated that even the actors couldn't have played it better. Mike also realized that today's performance was getting more and more interesting. Judging by the current situation, the Wu family decided to take advantage of this opportunity to take a dominant position in the city. And indeed, father and son quickly managed to stir up the crowd. Carlos quietly leaned towards the master and whispered that several families that had been on the Yu family's side were now openly supporting Hank. It seems they were simply bribed. In recent years, the Yu family and the Wu family had only been secretly competing and had never entered into open conflict. The elder asked with indignation in his voice what exactly his family had done to deserve such betrayal. Seeing that most of those present were already on his side, Hank declared that, as the saying goes, a wise bird chooses a suitable tree. These words finally angered the master. He slapped Hank in the face, asking if the Wu family was going to take the place of the head of this union. Hank immediately began to play the victim. He stated that the appointment of the head of the Wu family as the leader of the union was the choice of the majority. The old master was already tired of listening to such nonsense. He shouted at someone hiding in the shadows and demanded that they come out, declaring that Hank was completely unfit to be the leader. At that moment, everyone started looking around, hearing someone's voice, and suddenly the head of the Wu family, Bachi, appeared in front of them. He chuckled and reminded the old master that his name should be pronounced correctly. Seeing the man he was expecting, the elder asked what benefits he had offered these people to make them betray the Yu family. Bachi answered directly, "The Wu family only wants to destroy the Yu family, nothing more." Father and son immediately realized that if the Yu family fell, its property would be divided among those clans that supported Wu. The elder, as the head of the Yu family, decided to confront them to the end. He stated that Bachi was greatly underestimating their family. But suddenly he felt that he could not direct his inner energy. By the time he realized what had happened, it was already too late. Hank laughed and proudly announced that this was the action of a poison called madness in 7 steps. They bought it in the capital for $1 million. The elder couldn't understand how they managed to poison everyone with such strict security, and suddenly someone confessed that it was he who added the poison. Finn entered the hall with a smug smile on his face and declared that he would be the next head of the Yu family. The elder was enraged by such betrayal. He called his son a fool and asked if he really thought that the Wu family would allow him to live on. Meanwhile, Oliver approached Mike with a knife. Although deep down he hesitated. For the sake of the Wu family, he had to die. Mike just looked at him and asked if he was confident in his abilities. Just one phrase made Oliver tremble even more. The situation was becoming more and more dangerous. The elder was already weakening, but before losing consciousness, he still said something. He shouted at Bocce that he could touch the Yu family, but he had no right to even touch young Master Mu, otherwise the consequences would be dire. However, Bocce only waved his hand dismissively, declaring that he did not believe that this young man could be a high-level master. Meanwhile, Oliver was still trying to get closer to Mike with the knife. The elder was outraged by the behavior of his opponent. According to Bocce, there are no such people even in the city, let alone the country. Even the famous master could not take the final step to this level. He insisted that the elder was simply trying to scare them. After all, if Mike really was such a master, the Wu family would never dare to come to the Yu family's territory. After this, Bocce turned to Finn, pushing him to confirm his words. He recalled the event at the restaurant and asked everyone to tell him whether Mike was really a master of that level. Finn cautiously replied that Mike was not the Overlord's master, but in terms of strength he could easily compare to the great Julius. Bocce expected support, but instead, in a rage, he grabbed him by the neck and ordered him to shut up. The elder then turned to the Martial Arts Alliance representative and asked if the organization would really allow the Wu family to do such a thing. Minister Wang, the head of the Alliance branch, responded with just 2 words. He needed more money. Now the elder understood the true face of all these people. He then apologized to Mike for the Yu family dragging him into this trouble. Meanwhile, noticing Oliver's hesitation, Hank began to egg him on, reminding his son how he lost face in the restaurant because of Mike. At first, the young man coldly listed Mike's crimes, reminding him that the hero had kicked him 3 times that day. He then stated that he was going to first cut the tendons on Mike's legs and then on his arms, so that he would crawl on the ground like a worm. Hearing this, Hank remarked with approval that such cruelty was quite worthy of the eldest son of the W family. Oliver picked up the knife and declared that Mike had chosen the wrong side and therefore had no one to blame but himself. Then the main character finally lost his patience. His anger flared up, and he first crushed the glass in his hand. Then he quickly grabbed Oliver's wrist with his bare hand. As a result, the dagger instantly flew out of the enemy's fingers. However, the hero immediately took advantage of the moment, intercepted the weapon, and, abruptly changing the course of the fight, plunged the dagger straight into the attacker's palm. Oliver screamed in pain and began to call his father for help in panic, trying to understand how this was possible because Mike had to be poisoned. Meanwhile, Hank, mad with rage, rushed forward, wanting to avenge his son. However, the hero remained absolutely calm. As his opponent approached, Mike slammed his palm down on the table. He then used the push and a powerful kick to throw Hank away. Then the young man removed his foot and sat back down. It all happened in a split second, so those present were shocked by what they saw. Meanwhile, Hank stubbornly continued to convince those around him that Mike was still poisoned and now was the best time to attack. However, representatives of other families began to express dissatisfaction and claimed that the Wu family had deceived them into the conflict. Meanwhile, Bocce watched as the situation changed instantly. He clenched his fists in rage and knocked over the chair. He then confidently stated that Mike had indeed been poisoned and that he could personally prove it. According to him, as a master at the peak of the advanced level, he is able to determine with one test whether an opponent is poisoned. In addition, he expressed his desire to personally test the strength of the so-called top-level master. However, just as Bocce was about to move forward, he was suddenly stopped by the hero's powerful aura. At first, the man didn't even understand what it was. Mike's power collided with his energy, and there was a loud explosion. As a result, a huge hole appeared in the wall of the Yu family's estate. Wang watched the scene in complete shock as Mike sent Bocce flying with one punch. He flew outside, where he hung unconscious from a tree. Members of other families, seeing such terrifying power for the first time, could not hide their amazement. They were shocked that a top-level master was thrown back several meters with just one palm strike. Elder Yu and Noah approached Mike, wanting to make sure he was okay and also wondering if he had really been poisoned. Then the hero explained that he had indeed drunk poisoned wine, but had long since expelled the poison from his body. Noah, noticing his sister's unusual silence, began to tease her, noting that the old Sydney would have been eager to fight long ago. The girl, embarrassed, sharply pushed her brother away, who ironically noted that the result of his observations was 100% confirmed. Elder Yu also noted that it seemed that before his death, he had managed to see a person who could cope with this girl's character. Meanwhile, Carlos approached the elder with a bottle of antidote and reported that people had already captured the members of the W family. Elder Yu then addressed the assembled people, declaring that he had the antidote and that everyone still had the opportunity to repent. He warned that those who continued to be stubborn would end up like the Wu family. After these words, everyone immediately declared their willingness to follow Elder Yu and vowed to support the Yu family to the end. Then his son started distributing the antidote to everyone. The elder then turned to Mike, bowed respectfully, and thanked the hero for his help in saving the Yu family from destruction. After this, he announced that the family had one more request, to allow them to follow Mike and serve him. The hero hesitated for a moment, explaining that he could not guarantee them any advantages and that his life would be full of difficulties. However, the Yu family continued to insist on their decision. In the end, the young man agreed to accept their offer. After this, the elder announced to those present that from that day on, Mike would become the patron of the Yu family and his word would be law for them. He also ordered that this news be disseminated. Meanwhile, Wang's men remained dissatisfied with what was happening. They quietly discussed among themselves that the Yu family had simply decided to become attached to an unusually strong person. Taking advantage of the moment, Elder Yu proposed creating a union of the city's major families. Unlike the Wu family, which sought a monopoly on power, the Yu family intends to cooperate with everyone to develop the city's economy. According to his plan, after the creation of the union, an alliance leader will appear, as well as a council of elders, whose members will be elected by vote. In addition, it was proposed to pay special attention to the education of the younger generation, since the city's military strength remains its weak point. After hearing the proposal, Elder Zhang and Elder Li simultaneously declared their family's willingness to join the alliance. Then the head of the Hong family noted that since such influential families had already made a decision, his family was also ready to join. The elder then announced that the first question would be the election of the head of the alliance, which all those present would have to determine. Soon, one of the participants noted that there was no need for discussion here. The leader of the alliance should be the strongest of those present. He then emphasized that in the entire city, there was hardly anyone who could compare to young Master Mu. Sydney couldn't hide her admiration as she thought about how someone as outstanding as Mike could exist in this world. Her brother, noticing how captivated his sister was by the hero, began jokingly throwing out ideas to her. He said that if she really liked Mike, she might even decide on a clever way to get closer to him. According to him, such a responsible person as a hero would certainly take responsibility if the situation became irreversible. These words instantly made Sydney blush, and embarrassing thoughts about being intimate with Mike began to appear in her head. The more the girl thought about it, the more embarrassed she became, trying to drive away such fantasies. However, Noah continued to tease her, hinting that it would be better to take advantage of the opportunity today. Despite some internal hesitation, Sydney convinced herself that she would never resort to such base methods. Meanwhile, the elder addressed Mike, explaining that everyone present unanimously supported his candidacy. The hero explained that he was used to acting alone and did not have management skills, so he did not consider himself a suitable candidate. However, the elder continued to convince him, noting that the union needed a person who could truly unite everyone. Sydney also joined the conversation, asking the hero to accept the offer for the sake of the entire city's martial arts world. Meanwhile, her brother quietly joked again, noting that such a sincere request seemed very convincing. The girl, upon hearing this, immediately scolded him for his inappropriate jokes. Mike thought about what was said for a while. Eventually, he finally agreed to accept the position of head of the alliance. First, one person raised his hand and declared him the new leader, then several more participants joined him. Soon, all those present began to unanimously welcome the new head of the union. 3 more days passed from that moment. At this time, the hero was riding on a bus and accidentally overheard a conversation between 2 people sitting behind him. They discussed rumors that 2 top-level masters had appeared in the city in one day. One of them had been at the top of the level for a long time, but the alliance leader allegedly helped him break through with a few blows. In addition, this same man wrote a treatise which is considered extremely useful for the practice of martial arts. People were discussing that the leader of the Mu Alliance was an extremely mysterious figure whom almost no one had seen. Some even speculated that he might be a secretive master living in the mountains. At that moment, Molly woke up and, yawning, asked where they were. Then the hero pulled the girl towards him and said that there was about half an hour left before their stop. This gesture touched 2 women nearby, and they began to talk with affection about how beautiful the lovers looked. Hearing this, Mike just smiled. After some time, Molly got off at her stop. She waved to her brother, informing him that she would go to school first, and the hero, in turn, reminded her to be careful. It was at that moment that a message caught his attention. It said that an attempt had been made on Abby's life the previous night. After reading the news, Mike immediately took a rental bicycle and hurried to the Sue family residence. On the way, one elderly man even reminded him that he shouldn't look at his phone while driving. Then Mike entered the house where Axel was already waiting for him. He respectfully greeted the hero and expressed joy at his return. It soon became clear that the urgent call was just a pretext to get Mike back, which made Axel feel a little uneasy. However, the hero did not focus on this, especially since his vacation was coming to an end anyway. Suddenly, Abby's voice came from deep inside the house, calling for Mike. The girl immediately ran out and happily threw herself on his neck. She was very glad that her bodyguard had finally returned. Her father immediately demanded that his daughter get off, but she stubbornly refused. Meanwhile, Ben, noticing the return of the hero. However, the hero himself was unhappy that the man was here, and then he asked why he came here. He then reminded them that it was Mike who had previously instructed them to take good care of Abby and Alice. Ben then explained that after the hero left, the Heihuang sect began to operate again, and young girls began to disappear one after another. During the investigation, it was discovered that the cult's targets were girls with strong life energy, like Miss Sue. Therefore, it was decided to set up an ambush right at the Sue family's house to ensure Abby's protection and wait for the enemies to fall into the trap themselves. Ben also said that Alice was attacked, but Miss Lee had an artifact that allowed her to escape from the cult's clutches. Having sorted out the overall situation, Mike decided to take control of everything and thank those present for the work they had done. Hearing this, Ben ran his hand through his gray hair with relief and admitted that they had hardly slept for several nights in a row. He also mentioned rumors that there was a new alliance leader in town named Moo and asked if Mike had managed to see him. The hero answered evasively, noting only that he had seen this man and could confirm his strength, worthy of the level of a master of the highest level. Ben, catching the hidden hint, smiled knowingly and noted with slight envy that he himself would like to reach a similar level one day. Abby clearly didn't believe what she heard. The girl stated outright that he didn't look like a top-level master at all. According to her, she had previously heard many stories about such masters being almost invincible creatures. However, in the end, one of them turned out to be her family's bodyguard, and fate in this sense seems quite ironic. Hearing such words, Axel immediately made a sharp remark to his daughter, demanding that she show more respect. However, Abby complained that Mike had gone on vacation to have fun, while she had to sit at home all this time. Hearing this, Mike just chuckled to himself, deciding that the girl had finally learned her lesson. At this point, Axel explained that due to the disturbances caused by the Heihuang sect, it was impossible to keep Abby out of the educational process indefinitely. Therefore, he is going to transfer his daughter to the best university in Longshan, and then he suggested that the hero also transfer there. This proposal took the hero by surprise. He thought that with the right resources, almost any issue could be resolved. Axel reported that the head of the Liu family, Lucas, had emerged from seclusion, and many members of high society were already preparing to congratulate him. He invited Mike to join him, and Abby was instantly delighted to hear that they could leave the house. In the end, the hero reluctantly agreed to accompany them, and the next day, a luxury car was already parked at the Liu family residence. Abby walked into the estate on her father's arm and immediately noticed the huge number of guests. Meanwhile, Theodore believed that this same Julius was just a talented craftsman whom people exalted too much. No matter how much of a genius he was, he still couldn't compare to Mike, because the hero had long since reached the level of a top-level master. By this time, the father and daughter had already passed through the main gate of the Liu family, where servants were greeting the honored guests and escorting them to the main hall. One of the servants invited Axel inside, and Abby, remaining next to Mike, noticed that the hero was only trying to avoid unnecessary trouble. Soon, Axel and Theodore took their places. However, the latter felt extremely awkward, as if he were sitting on pins and needles. He invited Mike to sit down as well. However, the hero refused, explaining that he did not want to attract unnecessary attention and would rather remain standing. Soon, the Liu family's servant loudly announced the arrival of the venerable Lucas. A man entered the hall. Despite his age, his aura remained just as powerful. Behind him followed two attendants, Shen and Loris, and the look from one of them made Abby afraid. The girl immediately hid behind Mike and complained that this man was looking at her extremely unpleasantly, like a predator assessing its prey. In fact, Loris really did look at the girl carefully, noting her beauty to himself. However, noticing that Mike was nearby, he realized that this prey might be too difficult. Meanwhile, Lucas stepped forward. He delivered a welcoming speech, thanked all the guests for their visit, and invited those present to take their seats. At that moment, a man entered the hall, respectfully introduced himself as Chris, and said that he had come on behalf of the Hong family from Zhongjing. As a gift, he presented a pair of ancient jade Buddha statues, each more than 20 centimeters tall. Meanwhile, Theodore quietly explained to Axel that Chris was 7th on the list of successors to the highest-level masters. Lucas noted with a smile that he remembered this young man as a 10-year-old boy, after which he inquired about his grandfather's health. Chris reported that his grandfather was in excellent health and had predicted many years ago that Lucas would become a master of the highest level. Unwilling to give in, Axel also stood up and declared that the venerable Lucas was the true treasure of Longshan. Lucas replied that although he had reached the level of a top-level master, the future still belonged to the younger generation. However, Axel countered, stating that the young masters of Longshan were unfortunately not living up to expectations. Abby leaned close to Mike's ear and asked if what the venerable Lucas had said was true. Suddenly, Chris overheard their conversation. The young man became loudly indignant, asking who they were to speak ill of the venerable Lucas. The guests present began to exchange glances, surprised that someone dared to speak ill of a master of such a level. Chris, however, claimed that they were whispering and spreading offensive words, claiming that Lucas had already exhausted his potential. Axel immediately realized that his daughter was in trouble again and rushed to take responsibility. Abby couldn't stand that tone and said that none of them had claimed that the venerable Lu had exhausted his strength. However, Chris stepped forward and mockingly asked if she was angry only because he had exposed her petty behavior. At that moment, Mike was forced to intervene to protect her. The hero explained that he never said that Lucas had exhausted his powers and asked Chris to take back her words. Seeing that no one was stopping the conflict, Chris contemptuously declared that he saw no reason to go back on what he had said. He added that even Axel did not have enough influence to make him change his words, much less some servant. With these words, Chris decided to use force. However, Mike only replied that there was a reason, and the next second, with one kick, he easily blocked the enemy's attack. Chris was frightened and stepped back, amazed by the incredible speed of his opponent. Seeing that someone had stood up for her, Abby immediately sarcastically remarked that the opponent got what he deserved. Meanwhile, Lucas had been silently watching the whole time and wondering who this man was who had managed to resist Chris. However, a moment later, he noticed that Mike's powerful internal energy had already damaged Chris's energy channels. Therefore, Lucas came to the conclusion that this young man was clearly not as simple as he might seem. Meanwhile, Chris, humiliated and angry, cursed harshly and accused Mike of a vile surprise attack. However, he suddenly felt very unwell and spat out a mouthful of blood. Despite this, the young man stubbornly decided not to admit defeat. He rushed forward again, declaring that he would show the true strength of a top-level master. Chris raised his palm about to hit Mike. However, the hero cleverly dodged. Moreover, by the time Chris realized that he was already being counterattacked, it was too late. Mike struck with his palm filled with deep inner energy. As a result, Chris's energy channels were seriously damaged. The young man was thrown back several meters again. Lucas continued to watch the hero's every move closely, not missing a single detail. What happened was a real shock for everyone present. Abby, feeling a distinct sense of satisfaction, remarked with self-satisfaction that this was what a true master looked like. Meanwhile, Chris struggled to his feet. Despite his serious injuries, he still tried to threaten, demanding the hero to give his name. Realizing that the conflict could drag on, Lucas finally stood up and stopped what was happening. He then asked the hero's name, and in order not to cause unnecessary noise, Mike only gave his nickname, Wuji. Hearing this name, Chris instantly froze. He remembered the rumors about a man named Wuji, who allegedly killed Johnny. Then Mike confirmed that it was he who destroyed Johnny. These words aroused great interest in Lucas. He knew that Johnny was once considered the strongest master below the level of a venerable. Meanwhile, Chris pointed out that even if he was Wuji, speaking so disrespectfully about the venerable Liu was still too impudent. Mike again reminded that he had already explained his position and did not insult anyone. He only noted Lucas's current level. Chris was outraged again, declaring that no one was allowed to discuss Lucas's level. However, Lucas stopped him again and asked him not to act rashly. He then turned to Mike and asked him why he had come to that conclusion. Mike began by reminding them that when he tried to break through to the level of the Venerable, Lucas still lacked a little strength. These words struck Lucas because the young man described everything absolutely accurately. Mike continued that the violent breakthrough had damaged Lucas's health, leading to blocked canals and bone deformities. Moreover, given his age, his body's full potential had already been completely exhausted. Chris tried to object again, claiming that this was complete nonsense. According to him, masters of the Venerable level are the strongest. Chris was sure that Mike had finally crossed the line. However, Lucas unexpectedly bowed deeply to the hero and respectfully asked how he was able to see all this. Everyone present was shocked, but Mike did not explain anything in words. He just took a step forward and grabbed Lucas's hand. As soon as the master felt his energy, he immediately exclaimed in great shock. Mike then asked if he now understood how he had managed to reach such conclusions. After this, Lucas's attitude changed. He began to address him with obvious respect and invited him to go somewhere else to talk. Abby, noticing such a sudden change, asked her father in bewilderment what was going on. Axel guessed that the venerable Lucas had probably already figured out Lord Wuji's true identity. Meanwhile, Lucas gestured for Mike to follow him into the office. When they were alone, the master suddenly dropped to his knees and apologized. He admitted that he did not recognize the arrival of a great master of the highest level and turned out to be a bad host. The man even asked Mr. Wuji to assign him any punishment. However, Mike helped Lucas up and then asked him how he had managed to identify him as a master of the great level. Lucas admitted that he doesn't understand which legendary figure the hero belongs to. He only knows about the 4 great warriors of Wuzun. He knows about the head of the Martial Arts Alliance, the old patriarch of the Huangfu family, as well as the great elder of one of the hidden sects of Taishan. If even the head of the Martial Arts Alliance is only at the great level, then it means there really are very few masters left in the world. However, the hero remembered that civilization was several thousand years old, and the wisdom of ancient ancestors was quite significant. After a brief moment of reflection, Mike warned Lucas that he did not want his affairs to become known to outsiders. Lucas then asked if there was any hope of improving his current condition. Mike explained frankly that the situation was indeed quite serious, but then he added that he knew of a cultivation method. After this, Mike suggested bringing paper and a brush to write down the technique and recipe for the medicinal decoction. Realizing that he was dealing with a true master, Lucas instantly became overjoyed and began thanking him repeatedly. Meanwhile, outside, Abby noticed that Loris continued to follow her, even though she was just going to the bathroom. As she walked past the room, she suddenly saw Lucas kneeling in front of Mike. Surprised and at the same time delighted, the girl immediately ran up to the hero. At this moment, Loris was at a loss, as he could no longer follow the girl. Abby wondered why Lucas was kneeling before the hero, but Mike reminded her not to make a fuss. Abby, however, stated that it was none of her business anyway, and then asked the hero to help deal with Loris, who was pursuing her. Mike didn't even have to do anything. His cold gaze alone was enough for Loris to retreat in fear. After this, the hero noticed that he had already left, and added that if he appeared again, then it would be possible to teach him a lesson. Meanwhile, Lucas invited the hero to stay for dinner. Mike replied that he had arrived with Axel, so it was better to leave the decision to him. Soon, the Liu family held a small banquet, and the patriarch raised a toast and thanked all the guests for coming to congratulate him. Only Chris sat with a gloomy expression on his face, irritated by the fact that the Su family and even Mike were at the same table with Lucas. Jack, who was sitting next to them, also looked shocked. He never expected the famous Lucas to personally raise a glass in their honor. However, Chris was clearly not happy about all this. Noticing his extremely displeased face, Abby giggled softly and whispered to Mike that his facial expression was constantly changing, like a traffic light. However, the hero only remarked to her that it was better to discuss such things in a quieter manner. The girl stubbornly objected that if she didn't like someone, she saw no reason to hide it. Axel, having heard their conversation, reminded her not to create problems, because if it weren't for the hero's help, he would hardly have been able to send her to study. Abby was surprised, saying that it was just a university and she didn't understand how there could be any danger there. Then the girl took Mike by the arm and announced with a smile that from tomorrow he would become her classmate at the university. The next day, the guys were already at Yinkai University. There, the teacher introduced the students to three new students who had transferred to their department. The new students were Mike, Abby, and Jack. Abby was the first to introduce herself to the audience. Her cute appearance immediately attracted the attention of several guys. Then Mike gave his name. This time, several girls began to quietly discuss him among themselves, noting that he looked very attractive. When it was Jack's turn, the audience paid almost no attention to him, which greatly hurt his pride. After the performance was over, the teacher invited new students to take their seats. At that moment, Mike suddenly noticed Alice, who gestured for him to sit down next to her. The hero was a little surprised, because previously he only knew that the girl was studying at this university. However, he never expected to find himself in the same faculty or even in the same group with her. Abby felt a pang of jealousy as she saw Mike heading towards her. She muttered to herself discontentedly that he was an idiot. Then she pulled Jack by the hand and sat him down next to her. Meanwhile, Alice and Mike started talking, and the girl asked where he had been lately. The hero explained that he had gone to the cities to visit relatives. Then he asked if it was true that the Lee family home had recently been attacked by bandits. In another corner of the room, several students watched the scene. One of them noticed that this guy was talking too boldly to the most beautiful girl on campus and didn't seem to be afraid of problems. Alice explained to Mike that the Martial Arts Alliance was protecting her, and the jade bracelet he gave her confidence. Suddenly, the girl quietly said that he had once said that he treated her well only because he felt a duty to her. However, he doesn't need to take it so seriously because she never blamed him. These words made Mike think for a moment and remember his past life. At that time, he was completely alone. Those around him treated him with respect, but no one dared to get really close to him. Only Alice once extended her hand to him and gave him a little human warmth. For Mike, who had already become a street hooligan at the time, this was the first time someone had genuinely shown concern for him. However, because of this, a tragedy happened to Alice. The villains cruelly abused her, and the girl, not wanting to live with such shame, chose death. Still wanting to make amends with Alice, Mike said that in this life, if anything upset her, he would definitely fix it. The girl only agreed with him. Meanwhile, Abby grabbed Jack by the hair in irritation and whispered that this blind Mike was really annoying her. When the bell rang, signaling the end of classes, the students decided to take a short walk around campus. Then Alice offered to show everyone around. However, Abby immediately refused, stating that she preferred to look around on her own. With these words, the girl turned around and left. Seeing this reaction, Alice noticed that Mike's owner didn't seem to be very friendly towards her. Mike explained that she sometimes acts childish, but she's actually a good person, so don't take her words to heart. Then Alice suggested that we look into the gym, which was nearby. At that moment, a young man from the Shu family Milo approached them. He turned to Alice and asked if Mike was her friend. His companion immediately added fuel to the fire by noticing that this guy was the same new handsome guy who had recently transferred to their class. In response, Alice only named his classmates, an address that clearly upset the young man. Milo complained that he was sad to hear such a thing, because he had already managed to visit her uncle, who was very pleased with their acquaintance. Alice felt extremely uncomfortable with this overly intrusive behavior, so she explained that she was used to addressing people that way. She then added that it would be better to call her by her full name, and upon hearing this, Milo said that he would then call her Alice. He noticed, however, that her embarrassed expression looked very cute. Just as he was about to take the girl by the hand, he unexpectedly ran into Mike. He quickly got ahead of him and grabbed Alice's hand. The hero, under the pretext that they might be late for class, took Alice aside, thereby getting rid of the persistent interlocutor. The girl blushed embarrassedly at this gesture, and then Milo, who had long considered himself her admirer, felt a flash of irritation. He asked if she really wanted to show the new student around campus and offered to take on the responsibility. But before Alice could answer, Mike said that he was quite content with her company and that they did not need to bother others. Upon hearing the refusal, Milo's friend warned the boy not to act ungratefully, as the young Master Shu had done him a great honor. However, Milo immediately stopped him and noted that he shouldn't say that, because if Mike is Alice's friend, then he is also his friend. His friend quickly began to apologize for his abruptness. Watching this ostentatious nobility, Mike only chuckled and thought that modern guys were too fond of creating drama. At that moment, a message from Abby suddenly appeared on his phone, asking him to come to the stadium immediately. Mike immediately invited Alice to go there with him. Seeing them simply turn around and walk away, Milo was clearly displeased. Then he told his companion that they should also see what was happening. When they reached the stadium, a small crowd of students had already gathered there, loudly cheering on the fighters. Mike immediately noticed that one of the participants was proficient in martial arts, and his level was even higher than Jack's. Just at that moment, the enemy was about to strike again. And then Mike intervened in time and directed the flow of true energy. It all happened so quickly that Jack only saw a flash of light. Immediately after this, a blast of energy threw the attacker to the ground. Only after this did Mike ask Jack what exactly had happened, and he quickly explained that he and Abby had simply been walking around campus. And then suddenly some guy started following them and started pestering the girl and saying obscene things, so Jack couldn't stand it. The man who had just been knocked down turned out to be Leroy, a mid-level martial artist. Mike then asked Abby if the man had really been harassing her. The girl immediately declared that this shameless bully had bullied her. She had been offended, and Mike had to do something about it. This sudden complaint stunned not only Mike, but also many people around him. As he took a step forward, Leroy felt a cold gaze and immediately became nervous. He stuttered, asking what he wanted. The guy quickly warned them not to touch him, otherwise the consequences would be serious. He then stated that if anyone wants to fight, they should first find out who they are dealing with, otherwise they will regret it later. He was clearly hinting that he had powerful backers with whom Mike would not want to deal. At that moment, Milo suddenly stepped forward and ordered Leroy to immediately apologize to the girl. Upon seeing him, he immediately realized that he would have to show respect, and noticed that young Master Shu was also there. Then Milo said that since this girl is Alice's friend, then she is his friend too, so he demands an apology. Leroy was outraged in his heart, realizing that he was actually just trying to impress the new girl. However, he bowed his head out loud and apologized. Abby just snorted coldly in response. At the same time, the people around them began to whisper among themselves, admiring how influential young Master Shu seemed to be. Wanting to further win Abby's favor, Milo even bowed personally and apologized for what happened. However, the girl completely ignored his efforts and only noted that everything was fine, because Mike was next to her. Milo said that he had long heard that Chairman Su's daughter was beautiful, but after seeing her in person today, he realized that people were greatly exaggerating. Before Abby could even figure out what he meant, the guy burst out laughing. He ran his hand through her hair, declaring that she was actually even more beautiful than the goddess. Hearing this, Jack almost choked with disgust and noted that this line was so banal that it made him want to vomit rainbows. However, as one would expect from Abby, she reacted to such a compliment completely calmly. She merely thanked him dryly, after which she immediately turned to Mike, demanding to know why they had arrived so late. Hearing this, Mike thought that this young lady changed her mood faster than turning the page of a book. Meanwhile, Milo did not miss the opportunity to continue flirting with Alice. He noticed that she also had her own special beauty. Jack felt sick again at this kind of talk, and he wondered if Milo imagined himself as the main character in a manga. After this, Milo announced that he would like to invite everyone to dinner that evening and thus make amends for the guilt of that rude Leroy. Hearing this, those around him were filled with respect for him, because he was ready to take responsibility to protect the university's reputation. However, Abby asked him point blank if he considered himself a saint for trying to take responsibility for other people's actions. Milo explained that she had just arrived and didn't know the university very well, but there were many interesting secrets there. He spoke of a mysterious little room in the library and a famous caped hero, and promised to tell about it at the evening banquet. Upon hearing the mention of a cloaked hero, Abby immediately became interested and asked if such a person really existed. Milo confirmed that it was a figure wearing a mask that covered half of its face and a mysterious cloak. To everyone's surprise, Abby herself asked what time the dinner would be. Milo was momentarily confused, so she repeated the question, asking what time and where exactly they were going to meet. At that moment, the girl mentally decided that perhaps she had finally found the very hero who had once saved her. Milo quickly set a time to meet, 8 o'clock in the evening at a restaurant. Abby agreed and promised to arrive on time. Milo turned to Alice and reminded her that she wanted to talk to her former classmate, offering to join them that evening. The girl was surprised for a moment. However, then she smiled and agreed. Milo decided his plan had worked, confirmed the meeting time, and left soon after. After he left, Alice warned Abby. She said that such young men rarely had simple intentions and that their sweet words should not be trusted. In response, Abby laid her head on Mike's shoulder and noted that she understood everything perfectly. But with Mike by her side, she had nothing to fear. These words made the atmosphere a little awkward. Then Mike jokingly asked if she really thought so highly of him. Meanwhile, Alice looked down at the jade pendant that Mike had given her earlier, and a shadow of sadness flickered in her eyes. At 8 o'clock in the evening, guests had already gathered in the restaurant. Milo asked his partner if he had prepared everything that was asked of him, and he assured him that everything was arranged perfectly. He had hardly spoken these words when the door opened. Abby and Mike entered the room. Milo immediately pulled out a chair for her and invited her to sit down. However, Abby thanked him politely and said that she preferred to sit a little further away. Then she pulled up a chair and sat down next to Mike, pointedly ignoring Milo. He was clearly unhappy, but decided not to show it. Alice arrived soon after, apologizing for being late. Milo immediately took advantage of the opportunity and invited her to take a seat next to him, declaring that he knew how to take good care of girls. However, she also tactfully declined, saying that she also preferred to sit a little further away, after which she settled down next to Mike. When Jack was the last one to appear, he assumed Milo had pulled out the chair especially for him. The atmosphere became even more awkward. But Abby broke the silence and reminded Milo that he had promised to tell interesting stories. Milo also told that there is supposedly an abandoned library in the eastern part of the university. However, Abby quickly became bored and impatiently asked him to get to the point, reminding him that he had mentioned a caped hero. Hearing this, Milo cursed. The girl did not want to listen to the ghost story that he had so carefully prepared. However, he said that once upon a time there was a guy at university who constantly imagined himself as a superhero saving the world. He loved to wear a long cloak and a mask, and sometimes even climbed onto the roof of the academic building, claiming that he could fly. Abby asked curiously what happened next. Milo continued and said that one day, while trying to prove his ability to fly, the guy fell off the roof and died. After this story, both girls became so bored that they almost began to fall asleep. Meanwhile, Milo himself seemed to be waiting for something. He thought that according to the plan, everything should happen very soon. And indeed, outside, several men acting on his orders began to approach the room called the Bamboo Melody. Soon, 3 gangster-looking guys stood in front of the door of Bamboo Melody's private room. One of them, sniffing the air, declared that he could smell the scent of beautiful women. With these words, he raised his leg and kicked the door open. However, when the door opened, he suddenly came face to face with several guys. One of them immediately asked who they were. Only then did the guy with the mushroom haircut realize he was in the wrong room. Just at that moment, someone told them that the room they needed was on the other side. But 3 strong men had already come closer and again demanded to know who they were. The guy just spat contemptuously, landing on the clothes of one of them. He began to snap back in an insolent manner, declaring that knocking down doors was his specialty. He also added that they should return to their food and not look at him. Otherwise, even their own mother would not recognize them. At that moment, one of the men, Cole, couldn't take it anymore. He punched him, instantly teaching him a lesson for his insolence. Meanwhile, in the Bamboo Melody room where Mike was, Abby suddenly stood up and announced that they had to leave. Since the people Milo was expecting still hadn't shown up, he tried his best to persuade them to stay a little longer. He wondered why his people hadn't come yet. It was at that moment that a cry for help came from the corridor. The guy with the mushroom hairdo was kicked by Cole straight into the next room where Milo was. Then Cole himself walked in after him and said with a grin that he was curious about who had dared to knock down his door. And in the end, it turned out that all this was done on Milo's orders. When Milo saw him, he turned pale as if he had seen a ghost and asked if he hadn't joined the special forces and why he had returned. Cole smugly replied that he came back whenever he wanted and it was no one's business. Milo knew Cole was dangerous. He used to cause a lot of trouble, which is why Lou's family sent him to the army to discipline him. At that moment, the boy started screaming again, begging Milo to save him and justifying himself by saying that he was only following orders. Fearing that his plan would be revealed, the student abruptly cut him off and ordered him to shut up, calling him useless trash. Cole grabbed the bully and demanded to know what exactly Milo had ordered them to do. He confessed that Mr. Shu had ordered them to break down the door and start pestering the girls so that he could stage the scene of rescuing the beauty. However, by mistake, they kicked down the door of the wrong room and stumbled upon Cole. Hearing this, the 2 girls in the room were stunned. Abby turned to Mike, reminding him that they were talking about the scene where the hero saves the beauty. Mike was just surprised at what new trick she had planned. Meanwhile, Cole began to mock Milo in front of everyone, asking if he really still used such cheap tricks. Fearing that he would lose face completely, Milo rushed to justify himself to Abby and Alice, assuring them that he would never have resorted to such methods. Cole again noted that he had gone to so much trouble for the sake of just 2 girls. Although with his power, he could have acted much more harshly. He also added sarcastically that he had done similar things before, and these words completely drove Milo crazy. Then he suddenly asked what would happen if he started hitting on the girl he liked right in front of him. After this, Cole stared at Abby, causing her to back away in fear and ask what he was going to do. He began to brazenly admire her delicate face and declared that he wanted to touch it, reassuring her and calling her beautiful. However, Abby screamed at him to stay away. At this point, Mike decided to intervene and grabbed Cole by the arm, who was indignant that he had the audacity to stop him. Mike mockingly repeated that it was just a light touch and there was no need to be afraid. Cole began threatening, demanding that he let go of his hand immediately, otherwise he would not be able to guarantee that Mike's hand would stay in place. But Mike only tightened his grip on his wrist and said that he would let him go if he stopped behaving inappropriately. Cole became angry and declared that he had only been absent from Longshan City for a few years, and such impudent people had already appeared here. Then he broke free and took a fighting stance. He immediately recognized the hero as a martial arts master.